Committee Room 30, Song.
Okay, so welcome members to committee, and just to remind you that the meeting's being broadcast online and throughout Parliament buildings. So just welcome to anybody who is watching online today. Just would like to remind you to mute your mobile phones and to remind you that recording and photography of the meeting is not allowed. Okay, if you're content, we'll proceed with the agenda. So we have apologies from Claire and Philip, and Sinead has indicated that she'll be late for the meeting. I think the Economy Committee were having a meeting, external meeting today, so I think that might be on you. Okay, welcome on you. Okay, members, any declarations of interest to No. Okay, thank you. Okay, members, a few items of chairperson's business to get through. So 3.1, Irish Language Commissioner, the correspondence to the committee, and I'm going to refer you to pages 6 to 7 of your pack. So just to remind, the Irish Language Commissioner wrote to me regarding remarks made by some members, I think maybe it might be one member, at the committee last week, and requested an urgent meeting in relation to this. So just to advise that the clerk emailed all members seeking their views on this matter, and the members were in the majority agreement that the scheduled briefing on the 18th of March should go ahead, and that the Commissioner could respond to any questions at that time without the need for an extra meeting. And I think maybe just to give a bit more context to it, from my point of view, very conscious that we want to meet all of the three representatives, the three new appointees at the same time, and also given that there was only a 2-week delay, I thought that it was probably still timely enough. If it had been maybe 3 or 4 months, then it might have been more reasonable request. So, Timothy, have you indicated?
Yeah,
yes.
Just to be clear, I was very happy for Mr Deeds to be accommodated with the meeting today. I have no problem standing over what I said in committee on a week that is Innocent Victims Week for terrorism. We hosted the event on Monday, and today is actually 11th of March, which is Innocent Victims Day. I would have taken great pleasure of saying to Mr Deeds that what the words he used, which are every word spoken against the Irish language, could be seen as another blow struck in the cause of Irish unification. So he was echoing the very Republican statement that was made in 1982 by a Sinn Féin seminar, which was every word of Irish spoken is a bullet fired for Irish freedom. So I look forward to next week to raising the issues that I believe have been very controversial, that he has politicised his post, that he has been echoing that statement from 1982. I look forward to him coming here. I believe he has politicised the office, and I do believe he should be reflecting whether he should be the right person to lead that commission going forward.
I'm conscious it's almost an associated issue with this, and that's 3.3, and it's regarding the Irish Language Week event. I think that this is where the commentary came from. So I'm going to refer you to pages 3 to 4 of the table pack, and just a reminder that at last week's meeting the committee agreed for the clerk to contact the Speaker's office here at the Assembly to determine whether a transcript or recording of the event is available. So just to advise that the Speaker's office has responded, advising that the committee that the Irish Language Commissioner was not a guest speaker at the event and did not contribute during the formal programme. So I'm going to seek your agreement to note this item. So
just for clarification,
yes,
the comments I raised relate to his interview he gave to the BBC and Gareth Gordon on the steps of Parliament buildings when he was attending that event. So there'll be no transcript. It was a raw interview he voluntarily gave to the media, and he gave it as the Irish Language Commissioner, and that's a topic that I would like to explore with him next week when it comes.
Would you like to maybe just because you took forward the action?
I did, thanks Chair. Yeah, I actually contacted via our communications department. We tried to get a full transcript of the entire interview that was between Gareth Gordon and Mr Deeds. We haven't received anything yet. If we do get something in, obviously I'll pass it on to the committee, but we have attempted to get a transcript of the full interview.
And I think you fulfilled that request. Thank you, Clerk, for that work. Okay, 3.2, just to bounce back there to pages 8 to 9 of the committee packets regarding an invitation that I've received as chair of the committee from the British Embassy in Washington to invite me to their St Patrick's Day breakfast on the 17th of March. Just to note that, but also just to remind you that I've already indicated that I won't be travelling to the US this year. Okay, content to note? Thank you. So draft minutes, so going to refer you to pages 11 to 20 of your pack for our meeting held on the 4th of March this year, and if you're content that these are true and true reflection of the proceedings of the meeting. Content? Agreed. Okay, I'll go ahead and sign those. Okay, so matters arising, 5.1 and 5.2, and this is in relation to the Commissioner for Public Appointments for Northern Ireland and in relation to clarification relating to her recent evidence session. I'm going to refer you to pages 22 to 37 of your pack. So members, at our meeting on Wednesday the 25th of February, the committee held an oral evidence session with the Commissioner for Public Appointments. The Commissioner has provided 2 corrections to your evidence during that session. So Philip Brett asked which ministers the Commissioner had met with. The Commissioner wishes to advise that she has also met with the First and Deputy First Ministers, as well as the Department of Justice and the Department for the Economy Ministers. So the Commissioner advised the committee that the legislation in relation to her post has been revised twice previously. In fact, the legislation has been revised 3 times since 1995. So just to remind that no Commissioner was in post for the past 5 years, and the Office of the Commissioner for Public Appointments had no regulatory standing to receive or investigate complaints relating to regulated public bodies, and has no regulatory basis to receive or investigate reports relating to unregulated public bodies. Consequently, the most recent upheld complaints date from March 2021 and to the Department for Infrastructure, and the report has been anonymised and can be found in your pack at pages 38 to 57. Just going to seek your agreement to note this. Okay, go ahead.
Put in record, I thought it was a very good response from the Commissioner for Public Appointments. We wrote to the office, and within a week they've come back with a fulsome response.
Yeah.
And I think that should be noted.
Yeah.
That was very much appreciated.
Okay, noted, thank you. So 5.3, Victims and Survivors Service. It's in relation to some follow-up information that we've received, and you'll find it on pages 58 to 62 of your pack. So just to remind, at our meeting on Wednesday the 18th of February, stakeholders appeared in front of the committee, and while discussing the Victim Support Programme, the need for some clarity and context around the approach to do not attend therapy sessions, DNAs, was discussed. So just to advise that VSS has provided a short briefing note to provide some detail around the current and proposed future approach relating to DNAs. VSS has contacted all of their community and voluntary sector partners currently engaged in providing talking therapies and complementary therapies, seeking further views on the proposed approach to DNAs. VSS outlines that aspects of the Victim Support Programme remain under ongoing review with the partnership of VSS and community and voluntary funded organisations over the coming months and years. So just to seek your agreement to note this item and agree to write to VSS to thank them for the briefing note and to include the approach to DNAs as part of their oral evidence session with the committee on the 13th of May 2026. Okay, go ahead please, Carol.
So could I ask then, so I'm glad because it does appear that they are listening, which is great. But in terms of coming back to us, I would like a response back before their committee appearance,
Okay.
because all the groups who appeared in front of us have noted that this is problematic for them, and the burden has been put back on the people who are offering substantial support. So they've went back out to ask the groups of their views. I think we need to get that in writing.
The outcome?
Yeah, and even to ask the 4 or 5 groups who appeared what their view of it is, to make sure that everybody has the same information.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
That's grand.
Okay, so when we receive that back, then we'll put it the committee agreement to share the information. Is that okay?
Thank you.
Okay, 5.4, Police Ombudsman report on abusive positions for sexual purposes. I'm going to refer you to pages 63 to 101 of your pack. Just to remind you, at our meeting on the 10th of December 2025, the committee agreed to write to the Police Ombudsman's Office to request further information on its role as part of the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategic framework. Just to advise that the Police Ombudsman published its report, Abusive Position for Sexual Purposes, APSP, by PSNI officers, Analysis and Emerging Findings last week. The report sets out the emerging findings from analysis of alleged offences by PSNI officers over a 7-year period, 2018 to 2024. It highlights the often significant vulnerabilities of the 36 victims and builds a picture of the characteristics of the police officers involved. A total of 42 APSP complaints were identified as fit for analysis in the report. So I'm going to ask for your views on the report, and I know, Anya, you brought this up, I think it was last week, and you may wish to comment on it. Do you want to go ahead, and then we'll move on to the next section?
Yeah, obviously I referenced it last week. A committee chair, we are due to have the police ombudsman in the next few weeks, are we? No?
No, but I'll maybe move on to what we were looking at then was the police ombudsman is an arm's length body of the Department of Justice, okay, and if we did want to bring them forward for an oral briefing, it would have to specifically relate to that end of violence against women and girls strategy. But I'll just finish this. Matters outside of this remit, including any further inquiries being conducted by the Ombudsman, would be a matter for the Justice Committee and obviously for the Policing Board. My concern with all of this, because it wasn't just the 42, I think there's been 20 subsequently, and that's the people who have reported. My problem with this is we're just about to take evidence around historical clerical child abuse. We just finished abuse of women and babies in these institutions, and then victim survivors of troubles. I would say in 20 years this committee will be pushing for an inquiry into this. You know, so it's not just end violence against women and girls. It's this issue of just the victimisation of people who are vulnerable and who should be provided with a duty of care and support, and they are abused in that scenario. So I would be minded to ask the Police Ombudsman's Office. It might not be the right time now because obviously this is ongoing, but I think that that report was horrendous to read, and I'm sure the people conducting the research were absolutely horrified at what they had uncovered. Go to you first, please, Carol.
So I agree. I think we do. I mean, I appreciate the Police Ombudsman is under, the office is under extreme pressure now, but we are responsible for the lead policy on ending violence against women and girls. Like, we dealt with institutions who could, and going by the lack of apology in the Assembly a few years ago, were still trying to remove themselves from the context, the historical context where, you know, out of sight, out of mind. And the thing that struck me, even talking to some victims and survivors, like one of them was 14 when she was there, and there's a 14-year-old involved in this. And these, and this, I have no doubt, I would say there'll be a public inquiry well before 20 years.
But I've just said that this,
no, but you're right.
You can see it in real time.
But you can see it in real time. So I do think we need to get the Ombudsman in. And I also think we need to find out, let them, because we can't impede their investigation, let them get on to investigate it, but certainly have it on as an item we need to return to.
Yes. Timothy, did you indicate you wanted in?
No, if possible, could I raise like a 5.5, 5.6, a couple issues from the minutes? Yeah.
Okay.
So it just matters arising from the minutes. I was looking for an update.
Oh, no, sorry, I haven't moved off this item yet, Timothy. Just a wee second. Is everybody content then? Will we miss you an invite? Or do you, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm wondering, is there anything else that we need to be doing in this space?
I'm aware, Chair, that the Justice Committee last week on this wrote to the Minister, wrote to the Chief Constable and wrote to the Policing Board about this particular issue. So I think obviously there are, the Justice Committee is following up on this as well, but certainly we can contact the Ombudsman Office and find out. Are members more, would you like to speak to them before they have concluded their current investigations, or once that has happened?
Well, I think you could take their advice, but I suppose, like in the previous mandate, there were times whenever the Health Committee had a joint briefing session with the Justice Committee. So, like, I wouldn't be opposed if we maybe had a special meeting just on this, because I don't want to undermine, obviously, Justice Committee obviously have a huge role in this, as does the Policing Board, as I say. So I don't want to undermine that at all. But if there's a way, maybe some collaboration.
I think if we could do a joint committee, it would be better, because I'm sure the Ombudsman's busy. Yeah. The office is busy, but I think if we did a joint committee, it would send a powerful message out.
Right.
Okay.
members are happy, then I'll contact the clerk of the Justice Committee. and
Okay,
we'll-
thank you.
Yeah, Chair, that's what I was going to suggest as well, that maybe we should seek it as a joint
Yeah.
with Justice, given the circumstances, but absolutely needs to be looked at. So.
Okay, thank you. Okay, did you want to raise some issues under?
Yeah, so it's just matters arising out in the minute. So just to seek an update regarding the Quality Commission. Obviously, it's a body that is in receipt of public money. This would be the scrutiny committee that they would be responsible to. I'm very concerned that they issued guidance, and now we're not getting the opportunity to put questions to them on that guidance, which still to this day remains in the public arena. Now that we're in receipt of that letter, which raises serious concerns essentially with regarding us using outdated information, we were to pass on the letter to the Assembly Commission. Has
Done?
that
Yep.
happened?
Okay.
So that has been passed across?
That happened last week, yeah. I can forward on the email of me doing that if you wish.
No,
No, no, no,
Trust
I'm
you,
gra-
trust me.
No, yep, that happened last week.
But I'm very concerned about the possibility of a legal challenge taken against this place. And now that this committee knows, we need to ensure that the Assembly Commission deal with that. And that
Well,
we pass it over.
yes, I think this committee's sort of responsibility and remit within that, we've come to the end of it by passing that on now to the Commission. But I'm sure if you wanted to contact the Commission, they could.
It was raised
Give
in the
you more on
chamber.
that.
Yesterday?
Yeah.
It was, yes, that's right.
The other
Okay, go
quick
ahead.
thing was just for the Migrants' Rights Network. So they provided us with the oral briefing, or not the oral, the written briefing. And the suggestion from the committee was that we'd invite them to come and the PSNI. Has that happened?
Yes, so we've identified, we think the 3rd of June is a date that the Migrant Rights Network can attend committee. I actually spoke to the PSNI, and it's something that I was going to bring back to committee. I'm going to get something back from them, but just to keep members in the loop. PSNI aren't actually responsible for immigration raids. Here it is the Home Office. So I think the PSNI are going to provide a written briefing in the first instance, which members will get in the next couple of weeks. It may well be that on the back of that, members feel that it's actually more pertinent to speak to Home Office officials who actually carry out the raids, as opposed to the PSNI who don't. But the PSNI have indicated that they would be happy to come and speak to the committee, but I think they'd be quite limited in what they could actually provide in terms of the raids themselves. But it's certainly in hand, and as I say, yes, we've got Migrants Network, I think, we're penciled in for the 3rd of June.
Okay.
You know, thank you.
So I actually think we need to have mayors here and a representative from the British Home Office. With that, the PSNI provide cover,
Yes.
but they don't actually do the raids. The issue is you've got mayors who are placing very vulnerable people here and without any support. And then you've got the other end where people are coming here and they're subject to the British Home Office raids, and a lot of people until recently thought it was PSNI when it's not. A lot of people still think the Housing Executive are responsible for providing homes when they're not. So I do think there's a clarification needed. What I don't want is, so I think we need to have mayors in the British Home Office and separate to the migrants help, because it'll be pitting one against another. We're all able to make our own minds up in terms of what information or what questions we want to ask. But certainly I'd be really keen to have the British Home Office in.
Okay, do you go ahead. And then
I think
we'll move
also
on.
in that general discussion and debate, there's one other body that we should invite as well, and that's HMRC, because of the work that they do in rating employers and others in respect of unpaid taxes and employment activities that go on in that whole area as well.
Yeah.
Why exploitation of workers?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead. And
Sure,
then
sorry,
we
this
move
is
on. No,
totally
you're-
separate if you want to move on, but I
No,
just
it's
want
okay.
to reference, to go back to the police ombudsman
Yes.
stuff. I had referenced Carolyn and myself and a few party colleagues who met with the police ombudsman just before Christmas in a party capacity. Obviously we agreed to write to the police ombudsman during that committee meeting. I think it was the last meeting before Christmas. Did we write to them at that stage? Was the invite?
We did, Anya, so at that time when I liaised with the Ombudsman's Office, they advised that that briefing that took place, obviously, with yourselves and other party members, but this report was coming and that they'd prefer to wait, and hence why the correspondence and everything was in the pack this
That
week.
makes sense then on what you're saying. Yeah. Okay, members, I'm going to move on then if we're okay. So item number 6. So this is an oral briefing on historical clerical child abuse, and we have representatives of the Cross-Denominational Network of Survivors and Amnesty International. So I'm going to seek your agreement to...
For Hansard,
For
yeah,
Hansard?
I think Hansard should be coming in. In
Okay.
a second. We'll-
Hi guys. We're just waiting for Hansard to arrive.
They're just
Okay,
here, I think.
thank
There
you.
we are.
Good stuff. So can I have committee members' agreement that Hansard record this session? Okay, members, I'm going to refer you to pages 103 to 106 of your pack for the clerk's brief, and pages 107 to 121 of your pack for written briefing papers from the 3 different witnesses, and pages 122 to 66 of your pack for a copy of the correspondence from junior ministers to the interfaith clerical abuse survivors. Okay, so welcome. I'm going to welcome to the meeting Mr. Patrick Corrigan, who is Head of Nations and Regions, Northern Ireland Programme Director at Amnesty International. And then I have Ms. Nicola Holmes, who is a representative from the Interfaith Clerical Abuse Survivors, and Mr. Anthony, I think you probably go by Tony more, Gribben, who is a representative from the Dromore Group. So thank you all for coming to committee. Thank you for your written submissions. They came in good time, so I think all the members will have had a chance to read those, and we'll have some questions for you. But would you just like to maybe start and make some opening remarks? I'm not sure who wants to.
I'll go first.
Okay,
So
good.
thank you all so much for inviting us along today and giving us the chance to speak to you. So as Paul has introduced, my name is Nicola Holmes. I am a survivor of clerical abuse. I'm also representing today the Interfaith Clerical Abuse Survivors Group, which have been involved with the TEO Commission to Historical Clerical Abuse Research. I'm also a founding member of the Northern Ireland Survivor Council, which looks at bringing the voices of survivors to the forefront, which is really important today as well. So I suppose my message today is just really to listen to the survivors, and we really want to make use of the research that has been done and the recommendations that are being put forward, and I just want to highlight how important that is and how necessary that is today. So I'll pass on to Tony.
Yeah. So I share my very special thanks, particularly to Paula, who's been able to get us to the committee today, and to each of you for taking the time out. I know it's part of your portfolio, but to speak to survivors is so critically important for us. Now, I represent a group called the Dromore Group, and we're survivors from the Catholic Diocese of Dromore, South Down area, leading into South Armagh as well. And that particular diocese is particularly known for a number of schools and parishes where children were abused over a number of years. I was an active member of the reference group, very active, engaged in putting together or helping with terms of reference writing, advising on the reports as they come in. But can I just ask, have you in fact received the reports or the recommendations?
No, we have received a written briefing from TEO officials, and I think some of them are behind you at the back of the room there. So we have received it, but we have not received the reports. I can assure you of that.
Okay. Well, the thing is that the reports are quite dense. So when you do get them, it takes a bit of time to get through them. But the recommendations are very clear, very simple. And there's one key recommendation, that's for an independent public inquiry. And I just wanted to spend a little bit of time on that. I don't want to overtake what's happening inside TEO, but I wanted to share with you, given that it's perhaps the only opportunity I'm going to be able to speak to you, to say what I think a public inquiry would entail for us.
Okay.
Would that be okay?
Yes, I actually have questions on that, so I think if we just leave your opening remarks there, we'll bring Patrick in, and then because I think that'll be a key feature of the discussion. So, but thank you, Tony. Go ahead, please, Patrick.
Chair, committee members, thanks very much for the opportunity to give evidence today. Amnesty International, we have been working with victims survivors of clerical child abuse for I think 15, 16 years now, and been through the processes that led to the HIA inquiry and the subsequent work done on mother and baby homes, etc., that's still sort of advancing now. I suppose clerical abuse in faith settings is the unfinished business from that three-stranded approach from the executive. And I suppose our core message is that the abuse and the harm suffered by the victims of clerical abuse outside institutional settings, it's no less severe, and their right to truth and to justice, to accountability, is no less important. I think they have waited long enough, they waited too long, and it is a case of really justice delayed, getting into the realms of justice being denied. I think from the very many survivors that we have spoken to over the years, and become increasingly clear to us that the hardest part for many is not simply the abuse itself, but it's been the very many years of denial and delay that have followed in terms of really getting their voices heard and getting a response from government. So from a human rights perspective, which I suppose is one of the things I'm trying to bring to this discussion, is that when the state knows that abuse has happened, it can't turn away, and even when abuse is carried out by private individuals, the state has legal obligations to protect people from harm, to investigate allegations, and to ensure effective remedies. And the research, and I'm really sort of regretful that the committee members haven't had the opportunity to have access to the research, but the research commissioned by the executive is the most comprehensive piece of work done yet, the most comprehensive review of clerical child abuse in this jurisdiction, and its recommendations that we've touched on in the written submissions we've made to you have been widely supported by victims, by the researchers, and by the officials involved in this process. And I suppose we now want to see the implementation of the recommendations. The research isn't the end point; it should be the starting point for the work ahead. So I guess three key actions. We want to see the research published. We want not only you to have access to it, but the public to have access to it. It's important that there's public discourse around it, informed by the evidence gathered to date. Secondly, victims need access to dedicated trauma-informed support services. And finally, the executive should establish a properly resourced statutory independent inquiry to establish the truth, to examine failures both by faith institutions and the state, to ensure accountability, and crucially to ensure non-repetition into the future. And I think, as no doubt we'll discuss, some of the recent revelations coming out of the Presbyterian Church in Ireland around failures, catastrophic failures and safeguarding, should be a call to us that this is not simply a matter of historical abuse. It's a very much a present day reality, and I suppose we want to focus now. The committee has a really important role here. Your scrutiny role can help ensure the transparency, the urgency, and the accountability that we now need to see from the executive's response. This is about ensuring victim survivors are heard, that systemic failures are addressed, and ultimately that children are better protected in Northern Ireland going forward than they have been in the past. And I'm happy to get into any of those issues, so thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so Nicola, I'm going to start with you. And I suppose just to pick up from what Patrick was just saying there around, this is not historic. There are historic cases, obviously, but this is still ongoing today, unfortunately. So I just wonder if you could comment on your experience of, or what members of your group have shared in terms of the process of reporting the abuse. Were you taken seriously, the investigatory processes, and then any interaction with the PSNI? If you feel comfortable speaking about that, please.
Absolutely. So one of the research pieces, as you'll be aware, are survivor testimonies, and we have about, I think 37 was the final number within that. It goes a lot wider than that in terms of bringing those survivors to bring their testimony. It was a very short campaign because we only had so much time to include that for that research piece. So I would say that number would be significantly higher if that was to be done again. How long is a piece of string, really, is the answer to your question. There are a range of testimonies where people have been reported and not been believed, reported and it was kept quiet, reported and papers not kept and records not kept, to being assisted to report to the police and convictions happen. The issue with that is that really just comes down to personalities within a church and what structures are set up. In Northern Ireland, we do not have mandatory reporting laws, contrary to the Republic of Ireland, who now do, and that includes clerical professionals as well. So I think for me, this piece and some of the recommendations look at safeguarding, and I think our churches really need, as we had said, to be held accountable, but to that support, because we're looking, the churches are in the voluntary sector, they're not technically always trained in this to keep people safe, to report, to hold records, and I think statutory safeguarding for our churches would help as well as make them accountable. So there is a range there, and you're talking about testimonies right back from the 60s, 70s to 2010s for those that are included in the research but also have come to us personally. So there's a range, and it's very much a current issue.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, the follow-up question was, I think you've answered that in terms of what needs to happen, but thank you. So Tony, so you've talked there about the need for public inquiry, and in your written submission you talked about attention to be given to the cover-up during the Troubles. So I wonder if you can talk about that, but also you've talked about the role of bystanders or lack of action by those who had an opportunity to intervene and protect. I'm just wondering, in the context of a public inquiry, why do you feel that those two issues in particular are important? Thank you.
I would say that note was very much more specific.
No, and that's why I'm asking you about it.
Yes, but I think it's the issues that I will raise with you today would equally apply to other faiths and in other geopolitical areas. One issue that comes up is that we don't understand how, particularly for me, how a paedophile was on the loose for 30 years. Mm-hmm. How can that happen? When it was the worst kept secret in the school, particularly amongst youngsters in the schoolboys, that this particular paedophile, Father Malachi Finnegan, had a particular sexual interest in young boys. You were called out of study at night, and then you returned back to study within the hour, and then someone else was called out. That no one knew what was happening is simply not possible to believe. And I'm talking about school governors. They would have been aware. We know that in my case, in the case of St. Coleman's College, Finnegan was reallocated to a parish for a cooling off period before coming back in with and hitting on youngsters even more violently. So that the governors didn't know, that the teaching body didn't know, that the two sisters, one responsible for the health and care of boarding school pupils, didn't know. One of the testimonies in there is particularly mine, where the sister, and I'm sure of it, she knew what was happening but failed to intervene. And of course you've got the wider clergy in the diocese. The fact that people didn't know, it's not possible, but we need to know why. And we know that people turned away, and I have evidence myself where a priest fellow priest suspected that Finnegan was hitting on youngsters, but didn't do anything. And I'd like to come back to, the point about mandatory reporting. There is a piece of legislation, 1967, the Criminal Law Act, Section 5. It was introduced particularly at the beginning of the Troubles. It was not designed to deal with predatory clergy. But the provisions of that Section 5 Act, anyone who suspects that a criminal offence has been committed has a legislative duty to report it to the authorities. So we do have mandatory reporting, but that piece of legislation hasn't been used, and I want to know why. An inquiry would ask why that piece of legislation hasn't been used.
Okay, thank you. So Patrick, just to move on to you then. So in your submission you talked about, I think it's called the Plain Sight Report from Amnesty International in Ireland and the human rights duties. I think you've touched upon this a bit. And I'm just wondering if you could speak to why you feel the Executive Office should legislate for a public inquiry here, and what damage to the faith or the confidence of the victims and survivors, what impact there would be if there was a prevarication on a decision of whether to have a public inquiry, because we saw with the mother baby institutions took far too long. Everything just takes too long. So I'm just wondering if you could speak to why we need a public inquiry, what's the duties, and also what will happen if it doesn't happen.
And I think victim survivors of clerical child abuse are very conscious that they have been put to the end of the line. So we're 16 years on from whenever I started working with clerical abuse victims, and they started asking the Executive Office for public inquiry. They're still there, they're still asking. I know that some in the interim have died others have lost faith in political processes to deliver any sort of accountability for them, and have disengaged from all processes. And I pay tribute to those who have fought back then and are still fighting today. A public inquiry is important on this issue because, as Tony has suggested, we're not simply talking about individual perpetrators, individual bad people. In faith settings, there is a culture of deference to this powerful institution, maybe at an international or national and very much a local community, parish level, depending on the denomination. And often the clergy person is a very powerful figure within that community. And if they are the abuser, or somebody within their circle is the abuser, there is sometimes has been a reluctance among the wider church to rock the boat. Again, we've had touched on the fact that church institutions, the Catholic Church most well documented, but also the Church of Ireland in this jurisdiction and other denominations had effectively a policy of not reporting abusive priests they knew were responsible for criminal behaviour against children, and instead moved them to another parish, another diocese, or indeed another jurisdiction across the border. And we've seen this cross-border mobility, and I think when we do get to a public inquiry, it will be important that there is a cross-border dimension, and I think that's important for both jurisdictions to understand how perpetrators were kept removed from the reach of criminal justice systems, not just by non-reporting, but by actually moving the perpetrators away from the reach of criminal justice systems. There's also been well documented where there have been inquiries both in the Republic and also in GB and other jurisdictions. It has been uncovered that a culture of deference from criminal justice agencies, including the police, towards the churches and towards clergy people who are powerful figures in the community. In a Northern Ireland context, particularly during the Troubles period, there was also a compelling reason to maybe not rock the boat with certain churches and to keep stability, if you like, and to keep relationships. And I think, again, we have received information from victims where that was a dimension. A further dimension was the breakdown in trust between the police at the time and particularly the Catholic community, where the police was not seen as a reliable criminal justice agency to whom to report. So there's a whole mixture of issues here where there's not just individual perpetrators, there is church institutional culpability, and then catastrophic failures of the state to hold perpetrators to justice. And we've seen it in other jurisdictions. I think we will uncover it fully in this if and when we have a public inquiry. I think the consequences of not delivering that form of justice, I think, will be catastrophic. Again, what we have identified is that when victims feel unheard, when they feel that their reports of abuse go unvalidated and that they have no way to have the state listen to them, partly because they want to be able to tell their story, but also partly because they want the next generation to benefit from their bitter experiences, that they need reliable processes to deliver. Why an inquiry is important is why it was important in the other issues that we've talked about in this jurisdiction and elsewhere. It's important to get fully to the truth, to ensure accountability, to have powers to compel evidence. The piece of records research that was conducted as part of this three-stranded research process pointed to the fact it would be impossible to go further in terms of accessing records given issues around consent, around data protection, without the compellability that a statutory public inquiry would offer. Without that legal framework, that it would be impossible to really take forward that work further.
Okay, I've just thought of a small question, just before I hand over to the Deputy Chair, and that's for you. Michaela, you're doing some amazing stuff online in terms of TikTok and other social media platforms through that almost peer support organisation. Do you want to speak a wee bit about that in case anybody's watching today, maybe wants to just link in with you in terms of the support you're being able to provide to other victims and survivors?
Yeah, and it just makes it very clear. how victims and survivors want to be heard. We, I suppose as part of the Northern Ireland Survivor Council, we were able to get some funding from the Department of Justice and the Department of Health to commission research for survivors by survivors. And we had an event in terms of that, of bringing the voices of survivors, and we sold out in 3 days over the weekend. And I think that just shows the same to here in terms of how survivors just want to be heard and want to get their story out. And I know for me and for so many, what we went through was horrendous, but if we can tell it and use it so it doesn't happen to someone else, then that's a good reason to talk about it. And I think when I talk about the survivors of clerical abuse, it's the exact same thing. How can we make this better so that things are safer? So yeah, I think there is a bit of a movement in terms of survivors speaking for themselves, and that's what's all going on at the minute, and I think it's going to keep going.
Good stuff. Did you want to come in on that point, Tony?
Yeah, it's just on technology. Part of the difficulty that we have is that the press and politicians refer to historical clerical sex abuse. There's nothing historical about it whatsoever. It happened in the past. We live it in the present with the impact of it. But in terms of predatory clergy catching up with the technology, there was this recent case where a priest, somewhere up in the northwest in Donegal, but originally from Derry, had been on some kind of app, was able to engage with youngsters, and then was bringing them down to Bundoran or whatever to his caravan. The thing is that this is not historical, and that predators, including predatory clergy, are quite adept at using the technology in order to meet their sexual interests.
Well, thank you, that's a good point. Deputy Chair, please.
Thank you very much for to each of you for coming along today. And none of this is easy. It's incredibly difficult to talk about by you, and a lot of it is very difficult for us to listen to as well. Of that, there's no doubt. I have been on the committee working my way through the mother and baby homes and Magdalen Laundries stories, and listening to people, engaging with victims there, and hopefully now moving that to the point where we are going to have the public inquiry. I suppose as our committee report has been published in respect of that, and we're moving into the legislative phase of delivering that, and it will be interesting to see how that moves forward. Are there lessons that you think that we should learn from that in respect of where you are in delivering a public inquiry for this particular area? Obviously, the background research and a lot of the things are very similar in terms of the process. The circumstances quite often will be very different. But so I think the other thing as well is that in respect of the mother and baby homes legislation, we've had some issues around dates and the period of time to be covered. I'm very aware that, and two of you have at least made reference to this, that this is unfinished business. It could be happening to somebody now. And that's very disturbing. So how are we going to process and deal with the circumstances of that happening? And I'm very much taken by the point that you make about mandatory reporting and whether the law that we have is fit for purpose.
Okay, who'd like to start with that?
I'd like to come in first of all just on that, and maybe others then. Listen, this jurisdiction, as well as neighbouring jurisdictions in the Republic and across the water in GB, we now have quite a lot of experience of running public inquiries into different forms of abuse. And every time, I hope we are able to do it better by learning from what worked and what didn't work in the previous inquiries. I think that some of the lessons of what worked and what didn't work from the HIA inquiry have informed now how the mother and baby home work will be done. And I think there was some fantastic digging into that by the people involved in the various sort of research process to date, on which legislators have now been able to build, but also experiences from down south and from across the water. one of the difficulties, I think, with the HIA inquiry that victims will tell you is that it was not particularly trauma-informed. In fact, for some, it was a re-traumatising process, partly down to the structure of sort of an adversarial approach, also maybe down to the inequality of arms, that the religious institutions were represented by lawyers, victim survivors not so much. I think one of the recommendations that have flowed out of this research, that'll be for legislators to determine how to take it forward, is that the inquiry period would start from 1945. There may be legislative reasons for that. There are also reasons just in terms of what's a reasonable time period from which to start, and we can argue the toss about what's the best date, but certainly in terms of, if one thinks of the age of surviving victims and survivors, starting from that point might seem reasonable. One of the ways in which inquiries can be difficult is how long they can take. That's about having a long drawn-out process. Obviously, the longer things take, perhaps the more money they take as well. So one of the recommendations, again, among the research recommendations, is around a modular approach. How do you grapple with such a vast problem? I think the research identified there's something like 3,000 different faith settings in Northern Ireland, so not just the big denominations, but lots of smaller ones. So how do you grapple with that and this frankly unknown number of victims and perpetrators? So one of the recommendations is around a modular approach. So modules might focus on particular denominations or particular dioceses or particular maybe notorious prolific abusers or other themes, and a way to build the work, and that on a regular basis you get to the end of a module and you're able to actually provide findings, recommendations, and build on that and go into the next one. So there are different ways in which we can construct an inquiry. It is going to take some years. I think it will be important for the budget setters to set a multi-year budget in order to facilitate this. We shouldn't shy away from it. It's a very important piece of work, and it needs to be resourced properly over a number of years to do it, but it doesn't need to be done in a way that necessarily the HIA inquiry, for instance, was done previously.
Okay, Tony, did you want to pick up?
Mr. Dixon, particularly the key recommendation that comes out of the records report, when you get it, is good practice from Australia, where they have taken this modular approach, rather than having sort of an 8-year inquiry and having a big report, and people are in the cemetery before the report is delivered. I think as a group of survivors, we would like to see an annual a strategy which has a multi-annual perspective with a multi-annual financial commitment, but annual action plans where we can see progress and we can see results. That's going to be very, very important. There are 3 key points that all survivors refer to. The 3 things they talk about. We want the truth, we want justice, and we want accountability. And those three factors need to drive each of those modules as we move forward through a public inquiry. So avoid a heart type inquiry, and certainly engage with survivors to help define the scope and the design of the inquiry to ensure that we get a return on it. Thank you.
Anything to add at this point?
Yeah, I suppose in terms of the second part of your question, one of the recommendations is saying that this process should be victim-centred, that there should be open dialogues, and there should be care to avoid further traumatisation. And that has been failing so far, but that's something that I would really recommend, because we know how this abuse happens, and it is still happening today. And we have the evidence sitting there ready to go in terms of how we make changes and make our churches safe, while we're still hearing stories daily in the news of how churches aren't safe. So I think that's the main one. We need to listen to the victims and survivors and their stories, so that we can make the change in the future.
I'm just sorry, Chair.
Okay, well, you're fine.
One final question. It's as much to help me to understand some of this. Obviously, the main concentration of this will be about physical abuse, but is there an element also of mental abuse, both mixed with physical abuse, but also mental abuse on its own as well, from people in those clerical or church settings?
Do you want to take that one as well, Nicola? And then, no? Oh, sorry, Tony, go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, I can just tell you that the men who I work with, who were all abused around in one diocese, particularly around one school, St Coleman's College in Newry, I can tell you that I might come across quite resilient and come into these meetings and to share my own ideas with you, but behind me, there are broken people. There are people who are extremely badly damaged, and it not only affects the boy or the man who was abused, it actually goes right back into the family. And this, I think, this has been a policy blind spot. Not here, because I don't think we've moved here yet on the issues, but in other areas they fail to look at wider impact on families, and effectively it destroys families because there's a sense of guilt that parents weren't able to identify when their children were being abused, that they didn't understand their child when they knew that there was something wrong, but they didn't have that type of conversation to determine what exactly is the problem. So it's around the parents. There are parents' issues. Then there are siblings, and it goes back to the point that Patrick was saying, is that there was a sense of, well, I can't really report this because it'll impact on my family, because there's a sense of, it's the guilt of my guilt and their guilt, and therefore siblings have come forward more recently, and where there's been a breakdown in relationship between the survivor and the sibling, because it's brought shame back into the family. And I think the issue of shame we need to address. And I think it's this famous case from the Gisèle Niot from France, who was multiply raped through her husband and a group of men. She said, we need to shift the shame back to the perpetrator.
Patrick, did you want to add on this?
No, I mean, I guess we know from the HIA inquiry and from other similar inquiries that while the headlines often focus on sexual abuse of children, that child abuse can take many forms, including sexual abuse, including physical abuse, psychological abuse, and sometimes it's a combination of the above. And any of these processes, trauma-informed, need to take it from the victim's perspective forward, however it is they were abused, and be able to respond to that, because we're not just trying to save the next generation of children from just one form of abuse, we're trying to save them from any.
Thank you. Have you anything to add before we move on? No. Okay, so the next person is Carol, please.
So thank you for coming to committee today. It's not easy. So just to say that, and just to give you a couple of assurances, I don't think anyone in this committee will have any deference to anyone. After the length of time that we've got through the mother and baby workhouse mountain laundries and heard, I wasn't aware that Amnesty were involved. Patrick, we should have had you in, to be honest. But even just in terms of the whole culture of secrecy, culture of shame, and everyone knew what was going on. They knew why these institutions were there, and no one ever questioned why 14-year-old girls ended up pregnant. They didn't ask the pathways of someone ending up there. But just to give you all assurance that we were very, very diligent. We dug deep and then some. And the approach that we favoured and looked at was a modular approach from Australia, but also from the recent COVID inquiry, because it's more of a participative process in terms of survivors and victims. But the thing that's not sitting well with me at all, there's a constant reference to the research that we haven't seen it. So we will need to get to the bottom of that. But so in terms of safeguarding, so I think we need to get the safeguarding board in as well, simply because we need to make sure. So there's an obligation now. If someone's committed a crime and it's not reported, that's a crime for not reporting. So and we need to make sure, just to give you all comfort, that when we bring a safeguarding board in, we'll be asking them about religious and state institutions. I know even from preparation for the mother and baby that even a lot of youth clubs, boxing clubs, all connected to churches, as you call it, open secrets, people grew up with this and grew up with shame. But one thing everyone has said from yourselves and even the mother and baby is it needs to be victim-centred, victim survivor-centred, and it needs to have a trauma-informed approach. So this is just very new to us. I know you've waited a long time. It's new because I wasn't involved in HIA, but I was involved in the next one after that. And I still would see there's at least a long time in front of us before we get to stage there's an inquiry. But just to give you the assurance that when we start taking evidence and when we start asking people for their opinions and their experience, we do so not from a place of patronising you. We're doing it from a place of we need to make sure it's as good as it can be for you. I think that's the least that you are entitled to. So I just want to give you that. I just feel uncomfortable questioning you. I'm accepting everything you're saying. I'm not in any doubt about that.
Please put questions to us.
Well, okay.
We come here with resilience.
No, I know, but Tony, I think you need more reassurance, in my view. I think you need to know that we'll be as resilient and as resistant and persistent as possible on your behalf. I mean, for me, that's more important. And also to make sure that wherever the gaps are, we need to try and get them filled. Because one of the things that stuck out from your own evidence was no one wants quick fixes.
Sorry, what was that?
They don't want quick fixes.
No quick fixes, yeah.
No quick fixes. So it's just to give you just need to bear with us, because we want to make sure that if there is a public inquiry into this, that it's the right type and that no one's left behind.
I think it feels to me the Assembly Committee has been left in an impossible position. So we have had the benefit of seeing the research. You have not, and you're the Scrutiny Committee designed to hold ministers to account. And we're in a position where we're bound by confidentiality of a process we've been involved in, and so therefore, we have not given you the research reports. We have not published them ourselves. We have not leaked them to the press. We're trying to stick to the commitments we have made, but we're now at an age where ministers have had the research since July. Yep. We have not seen evidence of progress since. I'm sure there is discussions and deliberations going on behind the scenes. I know you're going to talk to officials after this and you may be given more information about this, but there has been a failure by the Executive Office to continue any engagement with the reference group or individual victims groups or other stakeholders, and so there is a silence that has fallen over the last 9 months. We don't know what's happening. There's been a lack of engagement with victim survivors, with the reference group members. You don't fully know what's happening either. You're I understand, sort of reluctant to ask questions to probe. If you had access to the research, you would have testimony from 37 victim survivors, for instance, as Nicola has talked about, as well as much, much more, and you would be in a much firmer ground on which to examine this issue and to hold ministers to account.
So this gentleman here, he's just been replaced, there was a woman beforehand, they're from Hansard, so they're taking an official record of everything that's said today, because obviously that in the future there might be legislation off the back of this. So just to pick up on Patrick's point there, I'm not sure whether Tony or you want to outline. So the research came out in July. If you talk to us about what has happened since then, what letters you have written, what meetings have happened, and your attempts to push this forward, just to pick up on, is that okay?
So that's all I was going to ask, rather than probing into research that we haven't seen, because it's unfair on you and it's certainly unfair on us. But if you could, in some detail, explain exactly what Paul has just laid out, because that is something we'll have documentation of that we'll be able to scrutinise and get beneath the skin of it all.
Well, that's probably you know the detail better than me, but I suppose I'm just going to pick up on your point about the safeguarding board.
Yeah.
just so that you're aware, I have had a couple of meetings with the Interfaith Committee that the Safeguarding Board run, and that is a representation of churches in Northern Ireland voluntarily. They also, the ones that are on that, commit what's called a Section 12 audit of their safeguarding voluntarily, and that's sort of marking their own homework in a way.
Well, it's all voluntary.
All voluntary.
There's no compellability.
No, there's some fantastic work going on there really is, but it's just not enforceable. So, but I'm going to pass
Michaela.
to Tony to answer that question, because
Like a bit of a timeline of engagement, please.
Yeah. Well, the group of survivors have been working through the reference group very diligently. We've worked through the process particularly with the chair, Lisa Caldwell. We were really happy when we got the reports in, and then we worked on recommendations, which involved all parts of the administration here. It was different departments had a person inside a working group. We worked with that working group as well. We got down to 6 recommendations. Easy, really easy recommendations, easy to understand. And these were delivered to the First Minister and Deputy First Minister in July.
Can I just say, sorry, Chair.
That's okay.
See, just in fairness, for completeness, we got a summary. We just got a brief summary of what the recommendations are. So I don't want to portray to you that we aren't aware. We got it yesterday, right? So it's just to say that's all we got, a summary of the recommendations.
Okay.
No pathway about how those recommendations came.
I think the evidence in the research builds up arguments for those 6 recommendations, and there's the one key recommendation is the public inquiry. Okay, we can come back to that. But in terms of the calendar, we worked with the TEO colleagues. Some of them are behind here, and the reports were delivered to the Minister, First Minister, Deputy First Minister, early July. Okay, we're moving into summer period. We don't expect immediate responses. Then we come back in September. We're waiting to get a response. We want a reply. We want a signal that the ministers have read the reports and that they disagree with them or they agree with them, or maybe some recommendations could be followed up, others not. Yeah. But it's been complete silence. So we've been back and forth with letters, both from the Dromore Group as well as with the Interfaith Clerical Survivors Group, because I think we're working really well together, saying, listen, what can we do to get you to a decision? You know, what more can we do? And it's, I think the deafening silence is what's concerning us. But coming back to trauma-informed approaches, people are upset. People are very, very upset because this sends a signal back to the churches. You know, mani puliti. You know, we're not working on this. It's not a priority. Something else on the calendar, which we're going to be addressing. So I think what we need to know is this issue a priority? Is the sexual abuse of children over a 30 to 40 year period? I mean, we now have more data coming in. Is this a priority for the administration? It's not a priority at least for the Catholic Church that I'm working with, the Diocese of Dromore. We continue to get pushback when we go looking for truth. I'm not going to go into particular details, but I think the question for you as overseers of the TEO, the TEO office is, you know, when are we likely to get a response? And to ask for a calendar. We have sent. No, I have a copy here.
You shared it with me, and I've shared it with the committee. So yes.
This is an action plan. Mm-hmm. This is an action plan. I think it's in your package of stuff. Yeah. I've never seen such a poor action plan in my life. You know, it's dispiriting. It's disappointing that an open-ended action plan can continue despite the fact that reports are in since July of last year, and we still don't know if we're going to get a meeting with the ministers. We decided, we've had a proposal. There's been 2 proposals recently. One the evening before the motion that was put into Stormont Assembly, which I thank you for, by the way, for all your contributions to that. To meet with us the evening before or whatever before that meeting, and I thought, you know, when you present a proposal like this to a group of survivors just before a critical political meeting, for me that's manipulation. You know, you have to plan meetings, you have to get an agenda, you have to make sure that everybody's ready and able to attend on a particular time. That didn't happen then. And then just before this meeting, we had a proposal that we would meet this morning again. Okay, I heard in the corridor from Patrick that because Gribben was going to be, I'm going to be up because I live down in Rome, that I was going to be surplus, it was going to be here, so that might have been an opportunity. But frankly, we don't think the time of talking to civil servants and junior ministers has passed. We now need to be talking to the decision makers. And it's Michelle O'Neill and Emma Little-Pengelly. Mm-hmm. We would like to meet them. We have never met them. We'd like to meet them so they get a sense of who we are as people and the issues that concern us. Mm-hmm. And I think we can convince them that they can get to a decision. We ourselves, as a group, have said, what's the hold-up? One of the hold-up could be budget. Well, let's sit down and talk about that. But we think a multi-annual financial commitment over a 7 to 8 year period with financial commitments and disbursements on an annual basis, that is possible. That is possible to get round the idea of the big heart type inquiry, which we don't want. Yeah.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to Timothy, please.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you very much for coming along this afternoon. I'm astounded by some of the information that you've shared with us regarding the timeline. That last July, this was presented to the First and Deputy First Minister, and it's been stonewall silence since then. So, layman's terms, so I have this right in my head. So, the Executive Office commissioned 3 major research papers, and that was looking at records, safeguarding and testimony. That is something that has been shared with yourselves. When I read here about these reports, we're putting a summary with 6 recommendations agreed by an interdepartmental working group with survivor participation. So you have taken part in that, you have been involved in formulating the recommendations. Indeed, you have the report, that's correct. So you are sitting on the far side of the table and you're coming to present to this committee, and that's something that hasn't been shared with us. That's certainly disappointing as a member of this committee. And yes, it's right and proper that you have that and have that before us, but it's a feeling on behalf of the office that that's something that hasn't been shared with us. So to give me a timeline of events, so the research was presented in July last year. We've heard about 37 testimonies dating back to the 60s and 70s to 2010. Can I ask when the TU engaged with yourselves to get your own lived experience? How long ago was that? How long has this process been going on with yourselves?
We do have one member of the group who contacted the Executive Office 15 years ago. Me personally, I only came public in my story last January, and that's when I became involved. You've been involved much longer.
I had a court case. In June 2021, and I immediately engaged with, in a structured way, with the church. But I didn't see this as only a church issue. Yeah. At that time, there was, I think it was part of the work that was coming. It was the fallover from the work on the institutional abuse. And there was a woman called Judith Gillespie, who was our chair at the time. And I immediately got in contact with her and built up a really, really good relationship with her. And we got to a point where we were starting to move on the work. Now, that work had a setback because there was a procurement process that was undertaken. And then it was all stopped, despite the fact that the experts had all been contracted. We had held our first meeting, and then that research or that work was all put on hold. We went back to the drawing board and started to redraft terms of reference. that was fine. But of course, that adds on an extra nine months a year. I wondered why the first procurement process failed. I think it was a decision of the ethics committee, or they felt that the experts chosen didn't have a sufficient academic profile for the type of research. But the latter group, the new terms of reference, delivered a number of teams that came together and worked on the three reports. Then we had Judith Gillespie. We didn't understand why Judith walked away from the project. I still don't know why Judith walked away from the project.
There was a series of chairs of that interdepartmental working group, so there wasn't that continuity, I think, in some respects.
And Lisa Caldwell came on board, and we built up this. It takes time to build up a relationship and confidence, and Lisa brought us through the process. And it wasn't always an easy dialogue between survivors and the administration, but Lisa was able to mediate. To get us to an agreement on the terms of reference, to get us an agreement on what the final report should look like, and ultimately on the recommendations. But now Lisa is gone. So we don't know where we are at this point in terms of our structured engagement with the TEO. Does the reference group still exist? We don't know. There has been efforts to meet up with some of us, but not all of the reference group. And I think it's extremely important going forward that all survivors are involved, not just those who turned up at meetings.
Yes.
Yeah, behind this there's a...
I think just to speak to your question as well, Mr. Gaston, I first accompanied victims and survivors to share their testimony of what they had experienced some 15 years ago. And I think at the time, actually, the current Deputy First Minister was a special advisor to the then First Minister at the time. So the call from victims for a public inquiry, which is still the central call today, is one of very long standing. There should be no surprise in the Executive Office about what the central demand would be, and that has been evidenced now by 3 bodies of research that have led us to this point. So it's about... There have been a lot of fits and starts in a very long, drawn-out process. It's about how do we now move from... We have the evidence base, we have the agreed recommendations, we now need a decision, and we then need implementation with victim survivors helping to shape those decisions, and that's the missing bit at the moment. And in terms of the ongoing engagement, unfortunately stopped really at the point where the research reports were handed over to the First and Deputy First Minister last summer. The reference group, and in fact I think the interdepartmental working group itself that was overseeing that work, effectively was closed down, and there has been no ongoing engagement apart from a couple of email contacts on the eve of an assembly debate or on the eve of this committee session this afternoon to suggest that to get a meeting in the diary with junior ministers. So it has been disappointing, I think, the experience of the last 9 months since the reports were handed over.
Are you aware of any churches or organisations that were consulted prior to the decision being taken that we're not going to publish these reports and we're going to sit on them?
I don't think that that's the issue at all. I mean, all of the main denominations and many smaller ones took part in the research and sharing their records, etc., and there were key meetings with key personnel from the main churches. So I don't believe that the issue not to share with the committee or to publish more widely the research is one that's been driven by churches. We think it would really help in terms of public discourse, in terms of public policy making, in terms of your role, to have the research out there in the open. If there are particular details need to be redacted, so be it. We're all familiar with that, but that shouldn't detract from the importance of getting this out there. As I said in my opening remarks, this is the most comprehensive piece of work done that helps set out the scope and the impact, the implications of clerical child abuse in this jurisdiction has ever been done. It's a really very, very important piece of work, and it should be out there. And I don't think it's helpful if it is only published at the same time as a ministerial decision is announced. I don't think that's the way round we should be working in order to help to inform that ministerial decision making.
So
I've actually seen the opposite. I've had safeguarding professionals attached to churches asking, is this happening? When's this happening? Because I think for them, more regulation around that would be more help. Because we have some fantastic people and some fantastic churches out there who want assistance to make sure their churches are safe, and that's the side that I've seen, that they want it as much as we do.
Tony, did you want to make a point as well?
Yeah, just coming back to Mr. Eason's his point about and Patrick's about getting this it's about communication with the wider public. I think Northern Irish society has to come to terms with a very unsatisfactory period in his life. Now, in our history, that can only happen with fullest transparency of the research and the recommendations. And I think the discussion, the fact that we're sitting here with you as elected representatives, it's an incredibly important point in our democracy that we're going back to deal with a very dark period, notwithstanding that this period has not completed. Yeah, there will always be risks. There will always be risks. But I think, Paula, you said at some point the issue related to the Troubles. My reflection was that, you know, clerical sexual abuse of children perhaps flourished during the period of the Troubles. We had a very unstable state. We had a police force that had to become an army. You know, we didn't have a normal criminal justice system. These people thrive when those conditions exist. I mean, I know that. I've worked in post-conflict, so I've worked a little while in Bosnia and in Kosovo, as well as down in Palestine. You know, the things that we're talking about here today, they will be talking about in 10 to 15 years' time. Hopefully they will get to that point. But the Troubles created a period where the paedophile could step forward and seek out his sexual interest. So I mentioned in my note about my engagement with Doug Beattie, and I'm happy to say that I'm going to be meeting, a group of us will be meeting Doug Beattie online on Monday evening. There are issues around the clerical sex abuse of children which clearly are Troubles related. One of them, in my case, was particularly with we're back and forth with the Chief Constable on this. The Chief Constable refuses to tell us why Father Malachi Finnegan, he can neither confirm nor deny that Father Malachi Finnegan was an informant. If a paedophile priest wasn't an informant, just say no, he wasn't. Yeah. But NCND just creates further chagrin.
Yes.
So, and that's one of the points. And there are other issues around troubles-related sexual offences. And Doug Beattie's proposal that these issues be included in future legislation, we fully support that.
Regarding the safeguarding report, I understand it points out systematic failures.
Tim, I wear hearing appliances and I'm not hearing you very well.
Sorry, the safeguarding report, I understand that it points out systematic failures across multiple denominations. Nicola, you have gave examples of churches coming forward and they were looking regulation to help them build capacity and put a structure in place. Was there any denominations didn't take part or didn't respond, and what was the reasons they cited for that?
So there was quite a few major denominations didn't partake. I suppose we also have quite a large number of independent churches in Northern Ireland, and I think very few of those responded. I was actually looking up earlier, and I think the number of congregations in Northern Ireland is quite hard to determine, but Google's telling me about 2,500. The safeguarding research went out to a sample size of 1,000 congregations in Northern Ireland and had meaningful responses from 291. So if we take that as a full, we have about 10% of churches in Northern Ireland responded and engaged in that safeguarding. I'm not 100% sure on the ones that were in. We did have the Catholic Church, we did have the Presbyterian Church and the Church of Ireland. We didn't have the Free Presbyterian Church. I'm not sure if we had the Elim, and again a range of independent churches on that, so we can get the list.
Was there a reason why people come back to say
They just did not engage.
you didn't engage with
Didn't
the
engage,
process?
and the research was said that it needed to be done quite quickly. We were chased on by FM and DFM to get that done, so there wasn't time to continuously chase.
So there was an urgency shown for that, but there isn't an urgency shown to release the reports.
But it also reinforces the point that only through a public inquiry would the state have the teeth in order to press upon those churches who didn't engage with the earlier research phase.
Regarding the independent public inquiry into abuse and faith-based settings, that goes well beyond just clerical abuse. Would that be right? Is that what you are calling for and wanting this public inquiry?
I think so. I guess clerical abuse is shorthand for people in positions of authority within churches or other faith-based settings. So most typically we are talking about clergymen in various denominations, but it may be other figures who have positions of authority within the church who abuse those positions and that, I guess, that cloak of respectability and indeed secrecy that surrounds them because of their position of authority. So in some cases it may be people who are youth workers within a church-affiliated youth association, but it would also include school settings where there is a religious dimension or a religious authority connected in terms of the governance of the school. So it's not simply about clerics per se, but it's about abuse of children in faith-based settings.
I was looking at the abuse essentially. It's not looking at a position. It's wider than that. So if somebody was involved in children's work, youth work, and was a volunteer in a church setting, what you're asking for, the terms of reference would bring that in as well.
Yeah, because I suppose that position and that setting is what enabled that abuse. So that all ties in with that.
Moving on to developing the specialist support services that you would be looking for, what support services currently exist?
Very little. I think, and that's one of the pieces that I'm also looking at when we look at survivors, especially in terms of faith. We are a very highly faith-based country. Our faith comes down to a lot of things, and it comes to our core. And when that's disrupted through abuse, that's not just going to be fixed by a few sessions of counselling. And we have very limited resources in Northern Ireland. A lot that are not deep enough to deal with the issues that present from abuse. So something tailored to that, but in terms of dealing with the fact that it's abuse, along with one of your core needs, which is that identity through faith. So we really would need accessible therapeutic services for people that have been through that abuse.
Okay, just one more and then I need to bring Sinead in.
Yeah, so at the minute, and I think you summed it up very, very well in your submission. Nicola said churches cannot be left to mark their own homework. The research makes clear that safeguarding must be overseen by independent professional structures. Currently there is more scrutiny regarding the cleanliness of a church's kitchen than their child protection procedures. That's a very powerful line, very hard-hitting line. At the minute, if a church is involved in the gift aid scheme, the Charities Commission would have a role in that. What would this body look like that you would like to see regulate in churches regarding safeguarding? Is there any remit under the Charities Commission that if somebody came forward to them with concerns either about child abuse, spiritual abuse, for them to do anything?
I know the Charity Commission can undertake investigations. I think for any church, and again, I'm talking about independent churches, but churches open up across Northern Ireland all the time. So to be registered as a charity, they have those policies and procedures in place. Again, depending on the personalities within the church, they may be followed rigidly. They may then collect dust after that. It really just depends. But as I said, and for someone that used to prepare the church kitchen, you had someone come in once a year and check that it was clean, that it was up to standard. No one's coming in and checking that child protection's there and up to place and up to standard. We've no one to call if there's just a quick question. There's no support for churches. You know, how many churches, congregations know the lines that their children can't cross with other people, that people shouldn't cross with their children. There's so much there, and I think there needs to be a body in particular that churches can go to help get everything up to standard, that people can report to, that people can get advice from. It may be Charity Commission, it may be the Safeguarding Board, I'm not sure, but I think we do need something specific to look at that and to hold churches accountable in terms of their child protection.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, please, Sinead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and can I apologise to the panel for being late, but the Economy Committee were meeting in my constituency today, so it ran a wee bit later than we thought. So thank you for coming in, and forgive me if I'm asking things that have previously already been asked. But first of all, can I say, look, your engagement with the TEO to date, your experience has been really, really poor, and that is unacceptable. And hopefully, even after today's engagement here at the committee, we will push to make things different for you going forward, because I think it's really, really important. And it's really important that you do now at this stage don't feel so lost in relation to the papers and that are with the TEO, and that movement is now required, and that you do get to meet and sit down with the First and Deputy First Minister. That is the very, very least that you can expect at this stage. So I would say that will be one of the messages that will go back from our committee after this meeting. So the one area, Nicola, I'm going to come back to you, because it's you know, I think that there is a real challenge here in the short term. There's long-term issues and there's short-term issues, but ending self-regulation by the churches is really a very urgent safeguarding challenge. So what action do you believe that can be taken now to ensure that we intervene where we need to in order to protect vulnerable young people going forward?
Absolutely. So I don't want to promote one organisation over another, but I suppose if we talk about the Safeguarding Board for Northern Ireland, so they have that interfaith committee where churches are coming together, they are sharing good practice, and they are signing up to that Section 12 audit where everything is being checked. But again, as I said, it's voluntary. If they had the support to enforce that, to get that across to churches, for other churches to even know about it. I personally made a visit to a church in the Ballymena area a few months ago because I was asked by some people about their child protection issues, and the good practice I saw in there was fantastic. If we can bring that across to other churches, the work's already there, it's already done. It's about sharing that information and making it a priority that's there. So I think those kind of safeguarding points could be done very quickly. People are already doing the work. We need to give them the support and structure to get it out there. The other thing is awareness. You know, we have a culture in Northern Ireland of, as we had said, that, you know, the church is the highest authority, but are we aware of when that stops? Do our congregations, are they aware what is abuse and when it's okay to speak up and when it's okay to report? And I think an awareness campaign like that can do so much. When I personally told my story, a friend at work had told me that her 17-year-old daughter was getting ready for a formal, and her friends were talking about my story and about how they didn't realise that could be abuse. And for me, that was the best way, the best reason that I could have told my story. So I honestly think the best weapon of protection is knowledge, and if we can do an awareness programme very quickly in terms of what that looks like, that abuse can happen in churches, and it's not just a Catholic church, it's everywhere. I think that's something that can be done very quickly with a very quick win.
Yeah, and I do too, particularly if the work has been undertaken, a review of the current safeguarding practices. There's a report already there, albeit that we haven't seen it, but that there could be some quick actions out of that, and that would be very, very important as well. And Anthony, I want to come to you as well quickly, and thank you for your testimony today. It's been very powerful. you said something that kind of struck with me. You said shift the blame or shift the shame. Sorry, shift the shame. And that wonderful French lady, Giselle Pelco, also said in so many words was shifting the shame as well to the abusers. And that's really, really important. But you also said, you talked about, you know, that the clergy were being shifted across different jurisdictions and moved, and the mobility of that. Would you support a strong cross-jurisdictional approach on this issue, given the issues given that this abuse was widespread and those that were abusing were moved within it? And we've seen that in the historical institutions of abuse and in the mother and babies homes as well. You know, it was cross-jurisdictional, and yet it was very, very difficult to deal with it in that manner. Have you any thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you, Sinead. Yes, I think one thing that when I try to explain the politics of Northern Ireland or the politics of Ireland, you know, outside, when I'm away from home, and people find it difficult to understand. But what they do understand is that all of the key churches in Ireland are not defined by a border. It's from Derry to Kerry, yeah? So we know, for example, that, and this is from the Diocese of Clogher, which is over Fermanagh, further west, we have one man who's in our group because, for various reasons, where he was essentially passed between two schools, one on the southern side of the border and one in Enniskillen. These types of things, this is why an investigation, a public inquiry will get to details as to how that was able to happen. We also know, and Pam, I know Pam from her days when she was the junior minister. When Pam first spoke to us, she brought up the case of Tommy Gorman. Tommy was a Church of Ireland survivor whose abuser was shifted from somewhere in Belfast down to deepest Kerry. This was one way of getting rid of the problem, but of course it doesn't get rid of the problem, and it just contributes to the institutional cover-up. So coming back to your question, do we need to be looking at cross-jurisdiction? Yes, but it's not only Northern Ireland and the Republic. We know, for example, that there is a hideout, or there was a Catholic priest therapy centre in Stroud in Gloucestershire, where priests were quickly removed when, for whatever reason, then to return home after their therapy to continue the abuse. So there needs to be a dialogue also within the UK between the police forces that were that should have known about those particular paedophiles when they were being moved between Uri and Stroud in Gloucestershire. So yes, a cross-constitutional engagement is important. I think what we also have in the South, they've moved much faster. Recently, they now have moved in. It's not called a public inquiry; it's called Commission of Investigation, looking particularly at sexual abuse in schools, all faiths. There is an opportunity for, had we, or had the TEO been able to move quicker on the recommendations, that dialogue could have started between those two inquiry teams. But we can still catch up on that. So cross-institutional cooperation is going to be important.
Yeah, thank you. And Patrick, just finally with you as well, you've been around this field for a long, long time, so thank you for your work in it. But Amnesty on this point has stressed that parity with survivors of institutional abuse is very important. And what message do you think it sends to victims in terms of nearly like a hierarchy of victims of clerical sexual abuse if progress is not made on their challenges? And, you know, when so much work has gone into other areas and this cohort which is significant and deep, are being left behind. So if you could kind of speak to that to me.
Thank you. Yeah, I have been around this issue for a long time. In fact, I remember giving evidence to this committee or its predecessor in, I think perhaps it was 2012, when the terms of reference were being drawn up for what became the HIA inquiry, and making the point to committee members at that point that those who were excluded, and in that case we're talking about the mother and baby homes victims, as well as the non-institutional clerical abuse victims, were effectively being treated as second-class citizens or second-class victims, and getting strong pushback from some members. No, that definitely wasn't the case. Here we are 14 years on, and they are still trying to press forward. So there's a growing deep sense of frustration that there's a reluctance to hear them, even after all of the pieces of research have been carried out. That doubt needs to be disproved by action, by implementation of the recommendations. These recommendations flow from a very comprehensive evidence base, and either ministers are willing to accept the evidence base and the recommendations, or for some unknown reason they are not. There's a lack of engagement at the moment with victims and survivors about what thought processes, decision-making processes are going on. That's unacceptable in itself, but also the delay in actually getting forward with the safeguarding measures, the engagement with survivors, and ultimately the inquiry and the other steps that will flow from that. It's simply unacceptable. I think in the written evidence, I noted research that underlined that the failure of the state or those in authority to listen to and respond to victims of sexual child abuse was a traumatising experience in itself. And I think that is what some are feeling at the moment, that it's the delay, the denial, the lack of information, the no end in sight. Here we are 14, 15 years on, that in itself is actually quite traumatising, a sense that we aren't simply second-class citizens, we're maybe third-class citizens or worse, because we're at the end of the line and we still don't have an answer.
Yeah, and when you think that we're actually talking about paedophilia, we're talking about abusing children. It should be the most vulnerable in our community that we actually wrap our arms around, and that failure even to address this in the manner in which it's been done is shameful. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Sinead. So thank you all for coming today. I think we've kept you longer than you probably anticipated, but just if there's any final words, I know you've given some examples of things that need to happen, etc. But is there just a final word you want to leave the committee with?
Just from my side, that the Dromore Group continues to stand ready to engage with the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister. We reach out with our experience, our expertise, our knowledge. We're quite a good group of people. We can bring value to the First Minister's office in order to shift this dossier forward. We've come to the end of what I call the first phase of a policy cycle, and we're nearly there. We need to get this over the line, and we would like to see this done as quickly as possible. And we are here to help. We are here to help the administration.
Thank you, Tony. Any final word from you?
I just want to stop children being abused in church. That's all I want. And I think how we do that is we make perpetrators terrified to commit the offence, and we have all the tools at hand. So I just want to get to work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Patrick?
I mean, I think it's been a very surreal committee hearing that we are discussing research and recommendations that we know and you have no access to, and you're the legislators. It's simply unacceptable.
Yes.
I would say even more unacceptable to you than it is on this side of the table. So I think that that surreal sort of shadow legislative process needs to come to an end, and you need to be given your place. Further than that, we would actually say that research needs to be put into the public domain, because this is a much more important, bigger conversation that needs to be had. Reflecting on the fact that this conversation has been going on in this building for the last 15, 16 years, it makes me really sorry that we have not made more progress sooner, particularly when I look at some of the safeguarding failures that have come to light in PCI, but elsewhere as well, that have happened in the intervening years. And I suppose I can only think about what if there had been a more robust and early intervention and robust safeguarding measures were put in place at that point, with those who were responsible for previous failings held to account then. Would the most recent generation of children have suffered? It's a question we will never quite have the answer to, but it does deeply worry me, and I don't want any more people to suffer in that way.
Thank you. Very sobering thought to end with. So, thanks again. Okay. Oh, sorry, Timothy, go
Could
ahead,
I
please.
just
Sorry.
one thing? So, in your letter to the junior ministers dated the 2nd of March 2026, there's 5 questions. So our next session is a closed session. I think each of them 5 questions you deserve a response to them. Simply because the next one is in private, can we ensure as a committee that you get the responses to the questions you've asked the junior ministers?
Well, I was going to excuse.
Up at the end.
Yeah, we're going to, and then we'll agree our potential actions. But that's certainly one that we can take on.
Absolutely.
And can I just check as well that the written submissions that we have made in advance of this, that they will also be published, will they, on the Assembly's website? No, they won't. Is it possible for us to record that we would like them read into the record effectively, so that what information we feel able to share is shared?
Yes. I wonder is maybe some of our social media accounts
Why aren't they published as part of the pack?
Well, the pack isn't published.
The pack's not.
Yeah, and that's, they are just part of the pack. So
is the Hansard report published?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Okay.
So
could it be attached to that?
Leave that with us. We'll see. But I do agree with you.
I'm sure there are mechanisms we can find.
If you had access to the report, I wouldn't be asking the question, but you don't. I think there is a need for more information sharing here at the very least.
Absolutely. No, thank you. We'll certainly take that on board. So thanks again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and just before we move on to our next item, I'm just going to ask the clerk to recap maybe on some potential actions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, there were a number of direct actions. I think we'll have a lot more after the next session as well, but certainly I think members were very keen to get an invite to the Safeguarding Board to come and talk to the committee around the issues, non-enforceability and interfaith committee. Again, something that may come through after the next meeting, but obviously I would imagine the committee would be keen to try and facilitate a meeting between FM, DFM and the groups.
Yes.
And so that could form part of a letter to FM and DFM. One thing that came up that the Chair and I mentioned about was just in terms of the reference group and the interdepartmental working group, I wasn't aware that they had ceased.
Yeah, Lisa?
We don't know if they've ceased.
Well, yeah. So again, I think
it doesn't seem to be operating like the consultative forum, for example.
So I think perhaps that could be a question again that the committee could ask, sure, in the next session, but also in a letter. That's all I had for now. I'm sure more will come through.
Then the questions that were posed.
Yeah.
Regarding the Charities Commission, so churches obviously have to be members of the Charities Commission to avail of the gift aid. Is there any role?
It's more than just the gift aid. They have to register as a charity to get all sorts of
absolutely, but is there an avenue through that to ensure that basic safeguarding policies are in place?
Yeah, so the reason I'm curious about it is because, say for example, you're involved in a wee football club, and to get access to funding, or you have to provide adherence. Actually, practically, how you're meeting the duty to safeguard children and young people. Why does it not apply? Or sorry, why does it? It seems it doesn't. Well,
does it apply?
I think that's for the Safeguarding Board.
Yeah, because Nicola said it was the Section 12, and it was a voluntary arrangement.
That's right. Yes.
So that I'm confused about that.
But I would say if it was a football team, they would probably still have to have access NI. There's probably some ways, but I think we need to sort of piece this jigsaw together.
Access NI is under DOJ, is that right?
No, health.
Yeah, health.
Sorry, Sinead, go ahead.
No, but surely within the context of the reviews that have taken place, the current safeguarding practices, surely there will be a report there and recommendations going forward. Because I honestly think that there's some of these that we could actually move forward at pace.
Absolutely.
But we need to have clarity in and around all of it.
Okay, so I think that's maybe
from what it tells me online, does sit under justice. So it's just something to...
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to propose then we move on to our next briefing. As you know, it's in closed session. Are we okay to go ahead now? Okay, so thank you.
Committee Room 30. Sound. 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 Committee Room 30, 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 Sound. Committee Room 30. 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 Sound. Committee Room 30, 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 Sound.
Okay, thank you. Okay, members, we're back in open session. And we've just had for those people watching online, we've just had a closed session briefing from the Executive Office departmental officials on the research and recommendations into historical clerical child abuse. And so we are going to ask the clerk to maybe talk to any potential actions from that.
Thank you, Chair. I think the actions come from both this session and the previous one that we had an open with the different stakeholder groups. So the first action that I have is that we invite the Safeguarding Board to come to committee to talk through certain issues, but certainly the non-enforceable aspect of what they do and don't do, and also the Interfaith Committee as part of the Safeguarding Board. So if members are happy with that, we'll invite them.
I think, Chair, also it's important that we engage with the Charities Commission as well.
Yes, okay. Do you mean to have them?
I think written correspondence in the first instance, because I have a feeling that they will distance themselves from a lot of this. But
it's our understanding of their role, I think.
But I think we need a clear understanding of their role. If we then feel that it's necessary to bring them to us, we should do that as well.
Yep. Okay.
That's fine. Sorry, go ahead.
Spiritual abuse. We're no further forward in establishing if somebody has been victim of spiritual abuse, how they raise that.
Well, what struck me, sorry, Carol.
Was raised as part of.
But we've asked a number of people, and they haven't come back and said so. Somebody suffers from spiritual abuse or is subject to spiritual abuse. Who do they then report that to?
Exactly. Yeah,
well, I suppose what struck me when you were having that exchange, Timothy, was that that's possibly where you would need the specialist therapeutic support services. Right. So again, it's a slightly different angle, but and that's what we found in the past victims and survivors. They have to get the support services by people who actually know what they're talking about and how to support. Excuse me, Deputy Chair. Thank you. Okay, keep going, please, because I'm conscious of time.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Also, I think members had previously agreed that we would be writing to FM and DFM, strongly advising that they meet with the groups that were in front of us today. And then there are a couple of other questions that have come out about that. I have down any plans for an awareness program as to what the actual where they are at the minute. What we're talking about is the difference between what TEO think is happening at the minute and what the groups think is happening in the minute, and perhaps the communication around that. So asking for plans on how they're going to do that. Also the status of the departmental working group and the reference group as to whether they were still operational or not, and if they weren't, when did they stop?
And a new chair for the working group.
And if they are still going, then a new chair for the working group. Let's see, awareness program. They were the only specific actions that I had.
Well, first of all,
Of the 6 questions.
Yes, but also there's the issue of the PSNI in terms of their
I asked the Met ministers in early December.
That's right.
Yeah.
And we're now sitting in the middle of March just to find out have they come back, because they're talking about non-recent.
Yes.
Yes.
So we also need recent as well.
Yeah.
Chair, there's a serious issue around this issue of awareness, because what happens, and people may have become aware even listening to us today, where do they go? What do they do? Who did they raise the issue with? There is no clear signposting available as of today. And I think we've opened that door, and I think we need a very urgent answer to that.
We'll incorporate that into the letter as well.
Okay.
And the 6 questions that were as part of them, obviously we will
On the letter, response
chase
to
up
the letter.
responses for those as
Everybody
well.
agrees? Are we okay with those?
Great.
Okay, thank you. Okay, members, conscious of time here, so yes, please come in. Yeah, so item 8, our oral briefing from departmental officials on the Programme for Government and the PFG Delivery Unit. So I'm going to seek your agreement for Hansard to record this session.
Great.
Thank you. Okay, members, going to refer you to pages 132 to 135 of your pack for the written briefing, 136 to 233 of your pack for a copy of the Programme for Government, and pages 234 to 237 of your pack for the written briefing paper. So I am going to welcome to the meeting Jacqueline Richardson, who's the Interim Director of Programme for Government at TEO, and Patrick Gallagher, who is Head of Delivery Unit at the Executive Office as well. So thank you so much, and thank you for sending a briefing paper in advance. But if you'd like to go ahead and make some introductory remarks, thank you.
No problem, and thanks very much for the opportunity for appearing in front of you today. So I'm going to start by providing a bit of background and update on Programme for Government, and then Patrick will provide the update on the delivery unit if you're happy enough with that. So you are well versed, but just as a bit of background, obviously Programme for Government was agreed by the Executive on the 27th of February last year. We launched then on the 3rd of March. It's the first PFG to be agreed in 13 years, which is a positive milestone for Northern Ireland. It focuses on the 9 key priorities, and just a bit of background. So focusing on growing a competitive and sustainable economy, expanding the access to high quality childcare, reducing health waiting times, strengthening the support for those with special educational needs, ending violence against women and girls, also prioritising increasing the availability of social and affordable housing, creating safer communities, protecting Lough Neagh and the wider environment, and driving reform and transformation across public services. So the TEO PFG team works with all the departments across the civil service. We monitor delivery across each of the PFG priorities, and we ensure that the progress is being reported transparently. So on the 26th of February, the Executive received an update on the PFG priorities for this mandate, and the progress was up to the 31st of December of 25. So I'll not go into them in detail, but I thought I'd give you just a few of the key achievements that have been achieved. So for growing the globally competitive and sustainable economy, more than 20 million has now been invested in a skills fund to support over 17,000 individuals and 1,100 employers. This is mainly aimed at the economically inactive and those who find it hard to access opportunities. Under the priority for delivering more affordable, accessible and high quality early learning and childcare, 55 million has been invested in the early learning and childcare provision, which has led to 2,500 additional full-time preschool education places, and over 25,000 children have benefited from the childcare subsidy scheme. With the cutting health waiting times, there has been 188,876 additional outpatient appointments, diagnostic tests and inpatient procedures, which is helping to reduce the waiting lists and improve access to care. And just one example of this is From the peak in June 22 for endoscopies, the waiting lists have now been reduced by 63%. More than 5 million has been invested in community-based action to end violence against women and girls, which I know you had a session on last week. Under better support for children and young people with the special educational needs, 120 special educational needs specific accredited training places in 5 further education colleges have been offered to assistants in preschool and foundation stages during this financial year. In the social, providing more social, affordable and sustainable housing, there's been 5,300 additional properties which have been able to connect to the wastewater infrastructure. An executive approved housing supply strategy was launched in December 24 and the Warm Healthy Home strategy was launched in February of this year. There's also been 83.7 million provided to the Supporting People programme in 25-26, which is providing housing related support to help 20,000 individuals and families live independently. On the 9th of December 25, the Executive allocated 7 million to meet the full cost of year 1 of the PSNI Workforce Recovery Plan. So that's helping to build safer communities. The Protecting Lough Neagh and the Environment Priority delivery is well underway now with the 37 action points. 15 have been delivered and progress is being made on the additional 22. And then finally in those updates, the Reform and Transformation of Public Services established the Office of AI and Digital in June 25, which is driving innovation. So those are just a few notable achievements and demonstrates the progress that's being achieved across the PFG priorities, which is moving us forward. The executive budget is also closely aligned with the PFG in this current financial year. 42% of resource budget, totalling approximately 6.9 billion, and 78% of the capital budget, totalling 2 billion, is contributing directly to the delivery of the PFG priorities. And we're all aware of the current fiscal environment is a challenging one. Just a bit of background then on the Wellbeing Framework, which I'm sure you are all familiar with. It sits alongside the Programme for Government but looks at the longer term views of the various elements. There's 52 indicators and there's that can be broken down by 10 domains, or they can be broken down by each of our missions to demonstrate what's being achieved in the longer term against our missions. So they provide us a benchmark that can help us consider the real impact that the policies are having on people's quality of life. And then the PFG recognises now more than ever that innovative approaches are essential, which are underpinned by a commitment to reform and transformation. So by doing these things differently, it aims to deliver real and measurable improvements in service delivery across the executive's priorities for the citizens. And I think that's a very broad scope of where we are. So I'll now pass over to Patrick to finish, and I'm happy to take questions afterwards then.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, please, Patrick.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for the invitation here today. So I know there's been a lot of interest among the committee members, wider assembly and the public in the delivery unit. So hopefully I can help clarify our role a little. To start, you have to go back to Tony Blair's government and the original delivery unit guru, which people may know as Sir Michael Barber. So there's been many governments since around the world that have seen the success of his approach and have sought to copy it, but not all of us achieve the same outcomes. So I think an important reason for that is that Barber's approach was specific to its own context, its environment and its constitutional reality. Of course, elements of Barber's methods and that wonderful word he coined, deliverology, can and should be replicated elsewhere, but it is not as simple as lifting exactly what he did and inserting it into a different system. So members will of course be aware that our constitutional situation is different to that in Whitehall. While collective responsibility is a fundamental convention of the British Constitution, here we have a mandatory coalition. So that doesn't mean that we can't apply the same good practice in delivery, including the deliverology concepts of targets, trajectories, delivery plans, reporting routines. We can and we do that. But it does mean that we have to adapt our approach to ensure that it works for us. So it is important to note that while there have been some central units across the NICS before, some of which did similar things, this is a relatively new concept for us. So there's clearly going to be some iteration and some back and forth before we get it right. The First Minister and Deputy First Minister have been very clear that doing what we've always done is not an option, given the challenges we're all facing. But changing is not always guaranteed to work out first time. So you have to test a new approach, learn what works and what doesn't work, adapt and try again. So as you'll know, the first priority agreed by the Executive for the Delivery Unit was health waiting lists. So we have had very detailed engagement with colleagues in the Department of Health to give us a real insight into the huge amount of work that they have been doing to develop and implement the HSC reset plan and the dedication of all those in the health service who are trying to deliver better services for people. As a small unit, we have to be realistic about what we can and cannot do and where we can best add value, rather than spreading ourselves too thinly trying to cover everything health are doing around waiting lists. We have therefore been focusing on their reset plan by monitoring and supporting delivery of various transformation projects, excuse me, including the rollout of multidisciplinary teams in GP practices. This is a core element of those really necessary wider health reforms aimed at strengthening early intervention and prevention, shifting care closer to home and supporting development of a neighbourhood model of care to take the pressure off our overstretched hospitals. We are also continuing to support the Public Sector Transformation Board in identifying further projects that will make a real difference to citizens, some of which are in health and others which are related to the wider determinants of health. Our role in driving delivery of those transformation projects across the system gives us an oversight of all those connections and helps us to start to tackle the wider challenge of siloed working that we're all grappling with. We're also actively exploring other areas we can add value, focusing on issues where several departments are involved but there's no clear lead. This is in the early stages, but there's a good opportunity here for the delivery unit to grasp some of these issues, bring departments together, unstick problems and drive delivery. So to summarise, we currently have 3 broad strands of work. 1 is specific PFG priorities identified by the Executive, focusing initially on waiting lists. 2 is the wider priority of reform and transformation, including the Transformation Fund and the transformation projects. And 3 is more specific, discrete, cross-cutting issues. So as I said at the start, this is a relatively new approach, so I can't guarantee that everything we are trying will work immediately, but we'll keep trying until we get there.
Okay, thank you very much, Patrick. I really appreciate that, and I don't envy the mountain of work in front of you. So we politicians would be out in our constituency quite a bit, and in my constituency of South Belfast, quite a lot of people who work in the medical profession, and a lot of the times they would say, look, we know what needs to be fixed, we know what needs to happen in our hospitals, in our theatres, etc. And obviously we've got Dr. Mark Taylor, who's been brought in by the Department of Health to look at the waiting list. So over and above that frontline expertise, people like Mark, who's been around for many years, very, very experienced, capable man, what do you bring to that? What can you add to that?
Good question.
Okay.
No, so that's exactly, and it goes back to Michael Barber's approach that delivery doesn't come in and tell departments what to do. They don't come in and say, you're doing it all wrong, we're the new experts, this is the way it should be. You come in and you have, the 2 things that he always starts with is you have to assume, you have to check that they have a plan, and you have to make sure the plan's up to scratch and test it and check if they target trajectories, which we can do. But you also, which makes it slightly more difficult in our scenario, he always said you also have to have nothing to do with budgets and just assume they have the money to do what they want to do. And we know that that is not necessarily the case in health or any of the areas. But our focus has been, we've had a huge amount of engagement with health. I've met Professor Taylor a lot of times, went to the departmental board, met the permanent secretary, and their advice was, health is a big department. You've got the audit office that scrutinises them, you've got the health committee, you've got all the trusts who have their own scrutiny procedures. What are we going to do that's going to make a difference? And what we decided then is link the 2, the waiting lists and the reform and transformation, and really focus on driving one project. So I'm sure the people in the multidisciplinary teams think that they've had all the bad luck because they're the ones who get DEO on their backs as well as everything in health. But there's a method to that in that, 1, we can apply those deliverology concepts, drive that delivery and make sure that happens, because they also do have to be accountable to the transformation board. And 2, we can make those connections with the other projects that are either already being funded or are coming on stream, and hopefully there'll be announcements soon. So that's in short what we're doing on waiting lists. Waiting list was a big concept, but you break it down and realise, exactly as you said, there's a lot of good people doing a lot of good things in hospitals. We're not going to go in and replicate that. We're going to go in a very specific area that is very, very important, because if you can fix and really help have an impact on driving the multidisciplinary teams, which are doing a great job already, then that shifts care away from the hospitals, gets it, and it takes off the pressures on GPs, puts them into, and makes people get seen quicker rather than having to wait for a GP appointment and come back weeks later to go to a physio. They're straight in. So that's
and I appreciate that, and the Bengoa principles in many ways underpin all that, and then there was obviously his report and then the subsequent health report. So a lot of this sort of predates what you were doing, and in many ways what has held up the multidisciplinary teams has actually been the funding and resources and stuff. So I'm just grappling as to see, there has been a will there within the department, and it's always been the funding. So I'm just wondering what such a small team. So we've got 1 grade 5, 2 grade 7s and an EO2. You know,
Staff officer since then as well.
Okay, well, I'm just saying in terms of being listened to and feeling that you have the authority of the executive, what are the challenges in that space for people who have been working at this for a decade plus?
And I think that is the key thing, is first of all acknowledge that people have been doing a huge amount of work in really difficult circumstances, and we're not going to come and tell them what to do. But equally, I think everyone recognises sometimes someone from the outside looking in can help. They can come with a different perspective. You know, having the non-expert looking at something might spot the obvious thing that the experts have lost. But particularly around the Transformation Fund, the fact that there is money there, you know, money the Minister secured for the executive whenever they came back, money to drive transformation. You know, that is a role that we can really get stuck into, because there's a requirement to account. They've got the funding not from health budgets, from a central executive pot. So they have to account for that slightly differently. That gives us levers to pull, but also I think the most important thing is it's not, you know, find something to do, it's make those connections with the areas of work and lead into this is a way of doing things differently in health, but it's also there will be different learnings of how you apply behavioural science, how you apply change management, how you bring in data, digital, AI. You know, you don't want those learnings just to be kept in one project. You want them to be shared. And the initial test cases are the 6 transformation projects underway at the minute, the more that are going to be funded soon, hopefully, and they'll come into our remit. So there'll be a good widespread of projects that we'll be driving, and that'll be on us to make those connections and make sure that they're, you know, it's a programme of transformation rather than just discrete projects in each individual department.
Okay, last one for me then. So we've got the Strategic Investment Board and their role and the resources that are allocated to that. So how do you interact with them? How do you work with them? Is there duplication? Have you your own swim lane?
Yeah, so there we have had engagement. They're probably more on like the capital infrastructure side of things. Okay. So there's now that's maybe simplifying things a bit much, but if you were giving me a one sentence answer, it'd be they're more in the capital infrastructure, and we are new. They've been around for longer, but where we're trying to cover that space is transformation projects. And you know there'll be work with them, especially access and expertise, because there's a lot of expertise in SAB, and we've been engaged with them, and you know where we can co-op people, bring people in, share the learning. So it's early days yet, but certainly you know they're one of the key ones up on the whiteboard that we need to be working with.
Thank you. Okay, Deputy Chair, please.
Thank you, and thank you for it's difficult to understand the concept of what you're trying to achieve, but I think what you've explained to us has been very helpful. So clearly it would be lovely if you were policing all of the 9 priorities of the programme for government, but you're not. And I applaud the area that you have chosen, or how was it? How did you choose the area that you have decided to concentrate on in terms of the specific area of health? That's my first question.
Maybe Jack can come in on the 9 priorities, because so our 2 divisions do work very closely. It's almost Jack's the overview of all the 9, and we're specific into 2. I'm in this position since September, so the waiting list was decided before that, but I think you know that was a decision FM and DFM and the executive that it was from May, June I think they decided. So I think just look, it's the thing that's going to affect nearly everybody. Everybody knows somebody who's on a waiting list. If you're looking to make a real difference to people's lives, I think that cuts across anybody across society. So I don't know if that was, you know, much more thought than this is one of our real serious priorities. Not that the PFG priorities, Jacqueline will shout at me for, they're not in order. You know, they're all 9 priorities, but one that they thought we could go in and focus on. And then through working through that, to seeing the connections with the multidisciplinary teams, you know, there's that opportunity for the transformation projects to have, you know, to start working with other departments and start small, you know, prove the concept basically with, you know, a relatively small fund of 235 million. And then, you know, who knows where you go from there afterwards.
And in terms of the work to monitor, observe, work with the Department of Health on driving down the waiting lists, to what extent is that a desktop exercise for you? I mean, are they feeding statistics to you and you're crunching those numbers? And to what extent do you give advice as opposed to just simply report the facts of the circumstance or the situations that they find themselves in?
So that's where it's initially we looked at waiting lists, it's a massive issue. And as the chair has said, it's a small team. So we did have those sessions with Professor Taylor, with the Permanent Secretary, and then we supported the ministers meeting the Health Minister. Again, that was before I came, but the delivery unit officials were involved in that. And that was looking at the big picture, looking at, asking statistics. I sent them a list of questions, are you doing this? A lot of desk research on what are they doing in Wales, what are they doing in Scotland, what are they doing in the Republic, but obviously recognising that there's different health systems. So, asking them the questions around triaging, around, incentives, disincentives for trusts, around use of AI. So we basically around how they use their data, how they interrogate their data to change waiting lists, how they validate their waiting lists. So a lot of questions from desk research and a lot of engagement. And that's where, there was a lot of assurance that work, there was very little new coming up. Like they are aware of these, which is not to say that it's been fixed, because that's a huge body of work and something they're working on. But there was enough there, from the work, the huge amount of work that Health are doing, that we don't want to interfere and, not add value. So we thought, well, the transformation projects, there's something that is very new as well for Health that they're trying to expand. There's money attached which brings levers with it and can help us apply that classic deliver unit concept to really drive those. And if we can, we're obviously, that the credit for those is all in the multidisciplinary teams, and the teams are on the ground and the teams in Health who are driving that forward. But if we can add a little bit to that, that's going to make a bigger difference than us spreading ourselves very thinly over all the wider stuff.
And in terms of what you're saying, what the feedback that you're giving to those people that you're working with, obviously if the feedback is positive, and I think the early indications are that the waiting lists are coming down. You've mentioned endoscopies and things like that. So to what extent are you giving validation to the people that you're working with in terms of helping them to deliver those new figures?
Yeah, so I think that it was almost a two-way validation and assurance that we started looking at this. We, as we've referred to previously, we recognise the expertise in Health. I think like the Permanent Secretary's probably been working in healthcare since before I was born, so you want to go in with an understanding of the levels of expertise here. The classic delivery unit deliverology approaches, have they got a plan? Are there targets? Are there trajectories? Are they working to the plan? All that is meant to be sitting aside from budget. Budget is obviously a massive factor at play for us. We are not the Department of Finance, we're not going to get into that. But it's trying to set aside budget as much as possible, is looking like our Health doing with some really good sessions, sitting down, special advisors brought in, really senior people in Health, and really working through this to say, is there a plan? It doesn't mean it's all fixed, but is it going the right direction? Are you doing something? Can we be assured that that's not the area we need to really focus on? So yes, that was done. I think that there was good assurance both ways from that, but equally, we don't want to be, that takes a lot of people's time and energy, to very busy people to go and deliver reports to me whenever that's not good use of their time or my time. So if we're really focused on homing in on one element, which is that sort of shift left, move it into the community, multidisciplinary teams, that's where we can make the biggest difference to wider waiting lists.
And is there publicly available information that you can extract the data from without
Absolutely,
actually having to upset the clinicians or the people by asking them to provide you with more information?
Yeah, my waiting list that the Health put up every month is excellent. So we would be doing that and going in and like doing our own assessment of what's going up, what's going down, what's changing, and asking questions to that. But again, that covers everything that Health do on waiting lists, and that is the best approach for us.
Just finally, if the carrot is recognising the work that's being done and telling people that you've made improvements, what stick do you have at the end of the day where things don't go well?
We ultimately report to the First Minister and Deputy First Minister, who are the charge of the executive. So that that's why the delivery unit is positioned here. The First Minister, Deputy First Minister, they meet the Health Minister as and when they need it. As I said, we've supported them in that meeting. They have that ability to make decisions at executive level, to ask questions at executive level. So we have a very good, close relationship with FM. With the FM, we report to them, meet the junior ministers on a monthly basis, meeting the SPADs nearly even more frequently to make sure that they're updated on what's going on. And that's going back to the point I made earlier around our particular constitutional arrangements. We do not, each department is its own body corporate, its own legal entity. We do not have the same levers you might have in Whitehall, but that doesn't mean there's no levers at all. And particularly reporting to FM and the FM is the biggest thing we have.
Yeah. And just finally, in terms of what you've been doing, and it's amazingly good that working in collaboration with that group of people, you've managed to drive down waiting lists. But when you lift your eyes up and look across the breadth of the programme for government, what do we do going forward? Do you just do tiny, I mean, you'll never leave the department, you'll be long since retired by the time you get out of the Department of Health, but how do you lift your eyes up and look at the horizon of all of the areas of the programme for government?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think I would be embarrassed to take any credit for the waiting list. I think there's people in health who've been doing this job for a long, long time.
I did say,
and it's a tiny, it's the Deputy First Minister's talked about a little tugboat that helps steer the ship around the port, but you wouldn't want them to think that we're coming in to take the credit. I think that the transformation work is sort of your seed funding almost for how you change things. Really good projects. We have been involved right from, the designing the call going out, assessing the projects, working out what works well. There's a board there with head of the civil service chairing it, the NIO permanent secretary, the chief scientific technology advisor, and then 2 independent, very experienced members. So there's good advice and expertise there. Ultimately, decision for the finance minister and the executive on what's funded, but having a team that's really dedicated to looking at those projects from start to finish. It's a 4-year programme, so that is the intention that we'll be there the right way through and make, as I said at the start, make those sort of connections where they're sharing expertise and learning from each other. Because things come up that you think 2 projects have nothing to do with each other, but yet they might be fighting to recruit the same person. Mm-hmm. And is there something you can do with limited workforce that you can share a person, or we can have a central resource that we can access and put into the project? So it's things like that we're looking at, that I think this unit will be one small part of that sort of change around.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Carol, please.
So thank you. How were these 6 projects chosen from the programme for government?
Yeah. The transformation projects.
Mm-hmm.
So there was when there was obviously negotiations with the Treasury.
I'm saying they're all good. I'm just wondering how they were chosen.
So there was open call. Yeah, the 235 million secured by ministers' negotiations with Treasury, that was agreed for transformations, so ring fenced, and that's why you've got UK government representation. Mm-hmm. So then designed a call, department's bid basically. They put in what they thought was the best, and then it was assessed, and then the board made a recommendation, but then ultimately finance minister, he brought the recommendation to the executive, and the executive agreed what goes forward. So it's needless to say there are far more good projects than there is money available, so it's not an easy one, but it was a good sort of problem to have.
No, absolutely. So in terms of the waiting list figures, are you aware of what money went into the private sector to reduce the waiting lists in health?
So as I said, budgets is not something we'd be specifically involved in,
Okay.
Partly because that would get in the way of being here to support, but also that would be stepping on toes for DOF have a very clear role, audit office have a very clear role in doing that, so bringing delivery units, or wouldn't have specific information on that.
And then, so in terms of supporting additional work, I mean, you've got stuff here around additional elective care appointments, ongoing work around Lough Neagh, and then the strategy about ending violence against women and girls. Is there, and I see some stuff here from education about special educational needs. Is there anything on coming from housing? Given that it's the first time ever, first time ever it's a programme for government priority.
Yeah, we're getting, obviously how we're reporting on programme for government and things has been a work in progress, as you are aware. There will be an annual report that will be published in May of this year, which will show a breakdown of what's being delivered over the 9 key priorities, but it'll also give an update on the building new foundations as well. So around housing, as you know, there's a lot of good stuff being done. The housing supply strategy, the warm and healthy homes, and I think one of the big key things has been the collaborative working that has been ongoing on the opening up the wastewater for those extra, 5,300. So those are the things that are coming up. But certainly in the annual report, there will be a full update on this financial year of what has happened all around that. So which will be published.
And I appreciate you're saying that this work's kind of promoted by the departments themselves through special advisors and very intensive working. But one of the things, I mean, Pam was the bill sponsor, but see the waiting list for children who are waiting on diagnosis for autism, and it's just when I see multidisciplinary teams there in GPs, which is very welcome. But the numbers of children who are on individual IEPs, individual educational plans, in preparation for waiting for assessment and then diagnosis, it's a difference of a child. A child's needs been recognised in nursery school, and some of these kids aren't even getting assessed until they're going into post-primary, and that's horrendous for them, and it's having massive impact. So I mean, when you say multidisciplinary teams, I think we need more specifics on what they're actually hoping to achieve, if that's at all possible. I mean, I know you're not dealing with budgets, but we also, and all this stuff's great. So, for example, the numbers of houses increase because of the impact of the water and sewage. But when I see multidisciplinary teams, and we think of all the needs and the waiting lists for MDTs, particularly for children and young people, it's very non-specific. So
I can say a bit about the multidisciplinary team programme, and again, this is a health programme, health project that they're running, and we're monitoring, but we obviously have the information to monitor and to drive. But that's around, it's GP practices putting in physiotherapists, mental health practitioners, social workers and pharmacists. So the concept then is that if somebody goes to the GP, or they ring the GP and they need to see a physio, well, they're put on an appointment. Whereas if someone's in the practice, the physio can say, well, or the GP or the receptionist or the practice manager can say, well, you can see the physio today. So it speeds up things. It reduces the need for referrals and going back. It frees up GP time because there's more specialists who might be better placed to solve people's problems. So that's the concept that I think it's 30% of GP practice at the minute, and the purpose of this programme is to bring that to 100% in 4 years. So that's what we'll be, looking at the targets, looking at the trajectories, and making sure that they're on track to do that in return for the funding that they're getting from transformation.
But if you're in further conversations with health officials, I've just appreciated if you could say it was raised, because it then has an impact on education, and then goes back to health and goes back to education. Education can't do anything without a diagnosis from health, and these kids are being failed. Thank you.
Can I just pick up on one point you said to Carol there about the waiting lists, and she'd asked about these to the private sector. So you'd said you sit down with them, what is your plan? And I find it quite hard to believe that you wouldn't understand, or you wouldn't have a concept of how much the private sector would use to drive the waiting list down.
Oh, I know that obviously that's part of the health service that they have, and money's gone in and
but
resourcing. But what I'm saying is that's not something that we are focusing on, because there's waiting lists as a concept is so big. As you said, there's a team of 5. So is the use of the resource, which is people, it's not coming with a load of money, it's 5 people. Is our resource best use to go and looking at the ins and outs of that decision, or
it's not a decision, it's really just how the outcome has been achieved if it wasn't through that use.
But it's been a mixture. There has been a mixture. But what I said is, our focus is the long term, because the concept of delivery unit is not meant to be those short term turnarounds, which is sort of why I said we can't take that credit. If you look at Michael Barber, it's 3-4 years, and that's where something like a multidisciplinary programme that is making the fundamental change over the long term. So that's what we're focused.
Just wanted to make that point. Thank you, Timothy, please.
Thanks very much, Chair. You were hailing that this was the first programme for government in 13 years, but when I flick from cover to cover, plenty of nice photographs, nice and glossy, very warm booklet, but very few actual commitments that we can hold the executive accountable for. And I suppose that was probably one of the main agreements to get this programme for government in place. So just want to start off with talks about grow a globally competitive and sustainable economy. And one of the lines we read is, we also need to help improve the quality of available jobs. So when you're going through, and I can understand why you're highlighting the benefits and you're highlighting investments in key sectors, But within the delivery unit or within the PFG unit, is there a spreadsheet somewhere which maybe captures the places in the areas where the programme for government and the ministers aren't performing and the commitments aren't being met? Or do we just look at the positives?
Well, we certainly wouldn't just look at the positives, because it's updates of progress in general. We wouldn't have the geographical data that we would know where it is and isn't happening. But you know, as we said, we know there's £20 million being spent for those 17 individuals, and those 1,100 employers are benefiting from that. And I think it was maybe on the news this morning or recently about the people that are benefiting from that are a very wide ranger. So we would know the sort of the types of people that are benefiting from it, but not geographically.
Yeah, so I think of the 300 jobs that have been lost by the US firm Cantor Fitzgerald, that was meant to come to Northern Ireland, where the deal was done, discussions were underway of how that was going to be announced, and then they encountered the Economy Minister, who during this critical meeting made the deal collapse. So where within the Executive Office, within the delivery unit, within the programme for government, when you are looking at all these things, are we capturing data like that?
I think at that sort of level, it's back to what Patrick was saying about health. A lot of that is, you know, Department for Economy related. We are focusing on the programme for government delivery, but I'm not sure if Patrick would be different, but certainly that would be more for the Department for Economy than for, you know, myself to answer today on that.
So it's a case of looking at the positives, maybe not so much the negatives. We move on then to protecting Lough Neagh and the environment. I was going to call him the Agricultural Minister, but maybe the Environment Minister is more fitting. He brought a ministerial statement to the Chamber which detailed that there's 20 million tonnes of untreated sewage going into our waterways each year. So the target for 2027 within our booklet here is we will deliver the actions in Lough Neagh, report an action plan including education, regulation, enforcement, incentivisation, all underpinned by science. I don't need to go and look at science to know what's happening in Lough Neagh. We have government data coming out of NI Water, which is an arm's length body of the Department for Infrastructure, which shows we are polluting our waterways. So we don't need scientific data to establish why our waterways are in such poor shape. Is that something that's captured or monitored by the delivery unit or the programme for government?
Well, certainly from, you know, we would be getting updates on how the Lough Neagh action plan is progressing, and you know, it's obviously, we all know Lough Neagh is not going to be sorted out in a very quick space of time, so there are actions to be completed by the end of this mandate, and we would monitor it at that level. So as I say, we know that there's been 15 have been delivered, and there's 22 that are on the way of being delivered, but that's as much information as I would be able to provide today.
Out of the millions that have been put into it, has any of that been invested into stopping Northern Ireland Water discharging into it?
Yeah, I think, you know, in my role, as I said, we are looking specifically at some projects, but even as we've discussed here, that isn't as deep as departments themselves. So if I'm taking health as an example, we're looking at health, so I will have more of an in-depth knowledge of health than Jacqueline will, who's looking over all the PFG, but I will not have as much as health will. So in those examples where they're specific for the departments, the role of TEO is to draw together, you know, an agreed programme for government and then agreed priorities for the executive office, but ministers have their own specific priorities in their specific departments, and also obviously officials are closer to it and will be better able to answer those sort of detailed technical questions.
Planet is a big thing in the programme for government, and it talks about impact of climate change. What about the A5 that fell because of our climate change targets?
Well,
Is that talked about?
The A5 is obviously one of the, it's mentioned in the Building New Foundations. So as I said, we're actually going out to the departments for updates on the Building New Foundations at the minute, and an update of those will be provided in the annual report that we're going to publish in May. But it obviously does remain a priority project for the executive, as it's in the programme for government.
So it's still there as a flagship, as a priority, even though it's paying farmers, some of them for the second time, to reinstate their land that was destroyed when the contractors went at risk to destroy potentially somewhere up to 2,000 acres of good farmland, to turn it into a makeshift site for a road that essentially was struck down. And court.
Okay, I'm conscious of time.
Yeah, so could I just do one?
Two more, one more, and
yeah,
then we'll move on.
It's on page 66A5, just so you're.
Yeah. So, but when I'm looking at the planet and talking about the impact of climate change, we also need to consider the impact of the climate targets that this place set and how it was struck down because of it. So on building and on housing, and this is something I'm very, very passionate about. You had mentioned about 5,300 new connections, and that's welcome. That has been accommodated within the wastewater system. 5,300 new homes that can be built because of additional capacity. But none of them homes are in villages like Cullibackie or Bershane, which can't see any intensification in the network because of the overload that's there. So our construction industry and house building is grinding to a halt because there's not enough investment, there's not enough capacity. So within the programme for government, that's a key pillar, the key heart of our construction industry. So where can I read and where can I hear about the update of how we can make sure that towns and villages that currently are closed to intensification can then start to see light at the end of the tunnel? Will that come in this is 24 to 27, can we expect that in the 28? The next mandate or the programme for government, what work is going ahead to ensure that construction and new homes can be built in villages and towns that are currently closed because of the insufficient capacity and wastewater?
Well, I suppose it's an executive document, so we're only here to give you the monitoring on it. So I suppose if it's something it would need to be brought to the table to be considered for the next programme for government, if it's something that you'd like considered.
I think when we're bringing the positives, there also has to be a realisation that just because the document's nice, warm and colourful and plenty of pictures, the executive and the delivery can't be said that it reflects that. So that's my piece as the only opposition member, I suppose, on this committee.
Present. Pam, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Patrick and Jacqueline, for your time here today at committee. I just want to ask a couple of questions around the delivery unit and PFG. Could you tell us maybe a bit more about the delivery unit and how it differs from other delivery units across the jurisdiction? That would be my first question to you. And you had spoken, Patrick, about the concept. So just for clarity, the intention is for short, sharp interventions as opposed to hand-holding departments.
So I'll start with that one. So the intention is we're looking at reform and transformation, and then with a particular focus on health. It is the longer term, but it's in specific areas rather than let's go and try and monitor a whole department. But what we're also trying to do is look at those specific discrete projects where everyone will be aware of something that needs to be done, but nobody owns it. It falls between 3 or 4 different departments that they all do a little bit of it. So again, trying to be realistic around what's achievable, trying to start small. We're talking to Belfast City Council about a project working at Building with People, which cuts across Department of Health, Department of Education, Department of Justice, Department for Communities. Everybody has something that they're doing to help these people, but there's no sort of joined up ownership, and that's somewhere, again, a test. It mightn't work, but it's something that we see, delivery unit being positioned in TEO under FM and DFM could go in and grasp and try. So that would be short and sharp, but the main body of our work is the long-term monitoring and driving delivery of particularly health, but also the wider reform and transformation. Other delivery units show this, as I said, this concept all started in the early 2000s. That was through Michael Barber, who initially was a special advisor and then moved into civil service. There's maybe a different dynamic there. Constitutionally, obviously, there's collective government. The PM can say jump and Secretary of State say high. That's been the approach in In England, you know, it's a different iterations over the years. They've got the Cabinet Office Missions Delivery Unit there. We've talked to Scotland, we've talked to Wales, talked to the Republic of Ireland. They've all delivery divisions, delivery units to do sort of slightly different things. Some of them are focused on, you know, short, sharp things where you go in for like 3 months at a time. Some of them are focused on long-term driving delivery. Some of them are focused on more elevating the skills that departments have to deliver rather than actually focusing on projects themselves. So it does differ a bit, and that's why, you know, we've had to look and see what works in our context.
Okay, thank you. And I actually think I was listening to Professor Mark Taylor on the radio, whatever that was, last week.
Recently, yeah.
And it was a very positive listen, I thought, because I really do welcome any progress we can make. And I know there was some criticism around, you know, how these lists have been shortened, but I mean that validation piece is really, it's really important. It's important to actually have the right statistics, even for in terms of giving people hope, but they they know that if they're waiting on a list, actually the list actually, you know, can possibly get to their number. I think that's really, really important. Is there anything else in terms of that waiting list initiative? Is there anything? What next are you planning to assist with in relation to health or whatever?
So, you know, hopefully there'll be announcements soon on more transformation projects. You know, that's that was with the executive for decision, and then I know that there's a draft allocation in the multi-year budget for further transformation. So pending on announcements by the executive, there will hopefully be another suite of projects. So where we see it will be, you know, whether it's 12, 15, 20 projects across all the priorities, across all departments. And then we'll be in the centre, not actually doing the work, because that's been the teams of the experts on the ground doing that, but monitoring them, driving them, supporting, stepping in where needed, making the connections. So that sort of is the long-term plan. And a lot of those, as I said at the start, are either going to be related to health or related to like the wider determinants of health. So, you know, it's not just fixing what health are doing in hospitals and GP surgeries, it's fixing people's health in general through you know, we all know the different things that impact.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of PFG, what priorities are the most challenging out of those 9?
I suppose they all have their own challenges in different ways, and probably depends on what day you ask and what's happening in the world. Obviously the Middle East is, you know, we don't know, obviously the priority at the minute for First Minister and Deputy First Minister is the safety and well-being of those people, but so I would hopefully, as I say, we're gathering the information for the annual report now, and hopefully and once we publish them, we'll make sure you all get a copy of the annual report. There might be more come out around that.
I also sit in Communities Committee, so we've talked a lot recently about housing. Clearly housing, really glad it's in there as a priority, and as a committee we've now written to the executive basically to say, you know, there needs to be earmarked funding to actually meet these targets that the executive have agreed. But how do we ensure that funding does follow the priority? You know, it's okay saying yes, we all support, we all agree we need X amount of houses built in the next 3 years, but how do we make sure that actually is followed through and that the funding follows behind it, and on the back of that, how are we actually monitoring that progress, and how can the public monitor the progress?
I think obviously DOF, you know, have the budget, but DOF, I'm not sure if you saw a couple, they did a paper which is the budget aligned to the programme for government, which is where I've got the figures from of how much is being ring fenced, and I know they plan on that being a continuing document that they, you know, update. So subject to the new budget being agreed, that piece of work will be done again. And it gives a lot of, I'm sure we could have it shared with yourselves if that would be useful. And it'll also be either annexed or a summary of it will be in the annual report for the PFG as well. But that should provide you some of the information.
Okay, because I'm just very aware that the draft multi-year budget from John O'Dowd, the housing allocation would only build maybe half of what the executive said. You know, this is what we want to build. This is what we're agreeing to do. Yeah. So I think that's incredibly challenging.
Yeah.
Okay.
You what then, Patrick?
No.
But you were. Sorry, I wasn't trying to change.
Not anymore.
Okay, Philip, please.
Thank you, Chair and colleagues. Thank you very much for this. And ultimately, the PFG is a political document agreed by the executive, and it's not for you to defend. Ultimately, the people of Northern Ireland will have their opportunity to cast their view on whether or not the programme for government has been delivered or not at the ballot box next May, and that's where ultimately the people of Northern Ireland will have their say. I just wanted to go to the delivery unit. So worked examples are always the best of these that you can show. So I'm going to give you a bit of homework if you don't mind, Patrick. So multidisciplinary teams are vital to transforming waiting lists. My constituency, North Belfast, awarded one Clifton Street practice. So sited on the right beside the Westlink. Okay, far too small to be able to host the space to be able to do this. They want to move across the road into Girdwood to deliver this new space to be able to have multidisciplinary teams. The Department for Communities owns the land. They don't have the resources to be able to transfer the land to the Department for Health to be able to do this. So they've asked Belfast City Council to do it for them. Belfast City Council don't have the resources to be able to do it. But what we now have is that North Belfast disciplinary team, which is meant to start on the 1st of April, can't start. So does the delivery unit have a role in putting these people in a room, all government departments, all meant to be working towards the same target, and say, listen guys, get your act together here, we need to get this done?
That sounds like a role that we have not been doing now because we're starting, but that sounds
Okay.
like something we should be getting to.
Yeah.
With the multidisciplinary teams, like that's the type of thing we would expect to come up.
Yeah.
And it does take a while to build that trust, build the confidence that somebody comes to TEO and sees us as being helpful. But that sort of is exactly the type of issue I said earlier about the Belfast City Council project that Belfast came to us with, that is around vulnerable people. But that's another one that we can certainly talk to. Again, trying to manage expectations around how many things we can do, but given that's really linked, we'll pick that up and look and see if we can help.
Okay. And then are you dealing with the planning reform?
The transforming planning is one of the projects as well, yeah.
And you're doing that at the
So
minute?
it's one of the 6 funded projects that we'll be monitoring. And
Will be,
driving as
but
well.
haven't started.
Well, we are at the minute, but it's very early stages. I know that's they're only starting to try and go out for recruitment to bring in new people, so then they can use the statutory powers in DFI to speed up the planning process.
So there's been no work done within the Department for Infrastructure on that yet?
No, so there has I haven't got a full
Sure,
update
no,
in
totally.
front of me, but
Yep.
that's what I know. The intention is, again, this funding has only been in place the last year. I know there's lots that have been getting in place from business cases and everything.
Yeah.
And we're getting our annual report prepared as well, which will also go to the executive and be appended to the PFG report.
And then 20.5 billion has been allocated to the Department for Justice for speeding up justice. Under the current minister, we have a situation where court times are at an all-time high. Barristers are on strike and ultimately victims are suffering as a result of this. What has been spent of that £20.5 million to try and speed up justice?
So that 20.5 is over the 4 years
Yep.
of the project. I don't have that, but we can't get the actual figures because it's sitting on my desk. I just don't have it in front of me.
Get that.
But then that is obviously around trying to increase the ability to do out-of-court disposals, doing those discussions with the PSNI and the PPS so that things don't have to go to court, because we all know how long it takes when something goes to court. But if you can dispose of it out of court, that'll speed up case processing time. So that's the type of KPIs that we are asking of DOJ, and we'll get in, and hopefully we'll have in for our annual report.
And one of the main aims is to clear case backlogs that are currently with the courts. So since this funding has been allocated to the Department for Justice, has the average time for someone to get a court date and the backlog increased or decreased?
So we have a request out for that data for the end of the year report. I haven't seen a recent copy, but it will be in the PFG.
Well, I'm going to make a informed guess that the answer is going to be that case backlogs have increased. And I don't think that if we're going to be serious about Sorry, do you want in, Deputy Chair?
I was just going to say, when barristers on strike got this a very lately outcome.
So I just want to make the point, and I really support the work that you're doing, Patrick, on the delivery, and I think it's vital. But if we're going to prioritise projects and award funding to them, the outcome needs to be seen from it. And on some of these that have been allocated to date, I'm not sure that we can. But on the health side, you certainly can. And it's probably why you focused on that first, and that's where your resources have gone. But I would encourage you to look at those other two, because ultimately planning is the biggest economic inability here in Northern Ireland to try and get things moving, and the current system of our courts are broken, so your help in trying to sort those both out would be much appreciated. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think that's us. I really appreciate your time today. I look forward to, as you say, getting some updated reports on the delivery of the programme for government. But for now, thank you so much for your time. Thanks so much. Clark, I'm just going to ask, whether there are any actions coming out of that?
The only action that I had, Chair, was, and Jacqueline actually mentioned it, that the DOF produce a budget document that is aligned to the DFG document that I don't think we've seen before, but we can always ask for that if,
no problem.
that would be great.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline.
That's something I think would be helpful, but nothing else.
Okay, members, just moving on quickly then. Content to move on to correspondence? Okay, refer you to pages 259 to 261 of your pack for a summary of the committee correspondence. Members, I just want to draw your attention to one item in particular, and that is 9.9 TO, Chief Scientific and Technology Advisor, and I'm going to refer you to pages 357 to 361 of your pack. So the committee has received a response from TO to its correspondence on the 12th of February this year, addressed to the Chief Scientific and Technology Advisor, requesting further information in relation to Department of Health research projects, trials and associated timescales, and to ask if Copilot operates as a cross-departmental function throughout the Northern Ireland Civil Service. So just to advise, the Northern Ireland Trusts follow the same UK-wide research approval processes as other NHS organisations, while also applying NI-specific steps to reflect legislative differences introduced by the Windsor Framework. A central public health agency approval team of 10 staff manage study-wide approvals, including 3.2 staff assessing new studies, with 3 additional full-time equivalents to be added soon. Individual trusts are responsible for assessing their own site-level capacity and capability, and both the central team and trust sites prioritise studies based on a range of factors. So just to advise that Copilot does not operate as a single centralised cross-departmental function within the civil service. Its behaviour is entirely determined by the type of licence a user holds and the access permissions assigned to that individual. So I'm going to ask your agreement to note this item and agree to arrange a follow-up oral briefing with the CSTA before dissolution.
Chair, I had raised a couple of queries around this at committee, and one of the queries that was wanting to get information on was the trial being done. I think it was Department of Health and Department for Infrastructure regarding answering AQWs.
Yes.
So I don't see that in here. Could we go back just to clarify before any future briefings, because that's something we get the background information on, when it was commissioned, how it's going, essentially when do they hope to have that work completed?
No problem.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to ask the clerk to read other items onto the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Members, item 9.2 is the 58th report of the Examiner of Statutory Rules, and there are no rules for the attention of this committee. Item 9.3 is the latest newsletter from the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission for February 2026. Item 9.4 and 9.5 are both from TEO. 9.4 is appointment of 2 lay members to the Northern Ireland Judicial Appointments Commission, and 9.5 is a subsequent news release about the same appointments. Item 9.6 is the monthly update from the Northern Ireland Youth Assembly for February 26. Item 9.7 is the Chancellor's Spring Forecast of the 3rd of March 2026, and relating to that is a oral statement from the Minister of Finance. Item 9.8 is a correction, a revised copy of the Maze Longkesh Development Corporation Partnership Agreement from the Assembly Business Office, and just to advise members that a date was required in the footer and a signature added, so those were put in the revised effort. Item 9.10 is a news release from the Department. First Minister, Deputy First Minister and Minister for the Economy announced £12.9 million investment by Cerdan to drive innovation skills and create jobs. And finally, 9.11, another news release from the Department. First Minister and Deputy First Minister celebrate the contribution of women across society on International Women's Day.
Okay, thank you. Anybody want to raise any matters in relation to correspondence?
No, Chair.
Okay, so draft forward work programme. going to refer you to pages 365 to 367 of your pack for the forward work programme. I'm going to ask the Assistant Clerk to talk through any changes.
Thank you, Chair. So just in relation to next week's meeting, the committee obviously will hear from the Irish Language Commissioner, but also the Commissioner for Ulster Scots and British Tradition, and also the Director of the Office of Identity and Cultural Expression. And then there'll also be an oral briefing from the Open University on its report, Learnings Why Riot the Whys from Beneath Youth Violence.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
There was a suggestion, because of Mr Deeds' request, that we would start early and deal with his issue separately. Is that...
I think that in the email that the clerk sent round, that was an option, and I think the majority view was no, we will just stick to our allocated time. People still in agreement with that?
Sure.
Okay. Anything else? No. Okay. Any other business? Okay. Date, time, and place. Next Wednesday, the 18th at 2 p.m. in this room 30. The meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Committee Room 30. Sound. 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 Committee Room 30. Sound.